Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Shining Through by Bedlamwolf. The Gum Gum no Mi is a fruit like no other. Where some Zoan fruit might be insulted at being renamed, yet Nika thought it was one of the funniest things. It was just a name, and a name wouldn't affect anything. Humans were entertaining, though the boy who ate them was a cranky, lonely child. That would be boring, assuming he survived their joining. But the boy, Luffy, ached for friends and fun. His need to be free of his fate was so strong that maybe Nika would bend the rules just a bit. It would be a shame to not see how far the boy would go. Adios.
Shanks at first didn't think much of the fruit Luffy ate. The man for sure wasn't exactly happy the kid ate it, but what was done was done. It was a strange power for a strange kid, and he was sure it would work out for the best. Even if little Luffy was pissed as hell right now that he'd never be able to swim. It wasn't till the next day when Makino approached him he thought maybe he should start to worry. "Do devil fruits change a person, Shanks-san?" she asked, glancing around the empty bar. He grinned. "That what I said, wasn't it? They give people the ability to do amazing, crazy, unbelievable things. But at the cost of never being able to swim again." He let out a chuckle. "I think that's the definition of a change, Makino." She frowned at him, and he felt a bit of worry. Does it change who they are, though? Ah, so she was being a worried parent. He knew logically she wasn't the boy's mother, but he related to the panic. He thought back to Uta and how upset he'd been when he realized some moron fed a devil fruit to a baby. Considering that, he gave it a bit of thought. Shanks knew logia fruits and would affect a person's personality to an extent. He wasn't exactly sure how, but he knew Crocodile had gotten more abrasive since they became a Sandman. And that rookie Marine used to be easygoing, but ever since he'd become Smoke he'd become a bit irritable. Jozu had always been hard-headed, but Shanks assumed it had become a bit more. Zone fruits most definitely changed a person, and probably in a similar way. Though he only had Marco and Sengoku as examples, because Kaido had always been a. He remembered Garp saying the old Marine hadn't been a hard-ass before. Marco was just Marco. He knew something was going on there, but no one except Newgate remembered the Marco before the fruit, so it was really hard to say what it was. Paramecia, as far as he'd been able to tell, didn't really affect the overall personality. Which made sense, because what sort of personality traits would Rubber even have? "I don't think you have to worry too much. Luffy should be fine. I'm sure he's angry now, but that's definitely more because he ate it than the fruit itself." Makino shook her head. "That's the thing, Shanks-san. Luffy isn't angry. He's not even a little upset." She held the towel she had been using close to her chest. "I know you haven't known him all that long, but Luffy has always been a bit unhappy. He's so lonely, you see, and bitter, though not as much as before you came. Sure, he's cranky sometimes, but what kid isn't?" "He's not cranky, he is unhappy," Makino corrected him. "You might not have noticed, but Luffy isn't allowed to play with the other children. He isn't allowed to even go to school with them. Most of the villagers only tolerate him because they know if anything happens to that boy Garp would kill them. Luffy is his precious grandson after all. But Garp forgets that makes him Dragon's son. And that fact? It's scary. If it got back to the Marines we had the son of Dragon here, our little village would be done for. Maybe the whole island." Luffy doesn't know this, of course. All he knows is he isn't allowed to be a normal boy. That no one cares what he gets up to so long as they're not involved. So yes, Shanks-san, he is bitter. Not angry, thank the gods, though one day I don't think the mayor and I will be enough. Shanks hadn't realized it was that bad. Of course he knew who Luffy's father was. He just thought the distance he'd noticed between the villagers and the boy was because while he visited Luffy was almost always nearby. It hadn't occurred to him that Luffy hung around them was because he and his crew treated Luffy like a normal kid. The cranky pouting and shouts at the crew to stop being mean took on a completely different feel. "Alright, I'll go talk to him. Where's the little anchor?" "Up in his room," Makino replied easily enough. "Please, just let me know what's going on with him." "Will do," he told her with a jaunty little wave before making it up the stairs. Luffy's room was at the end of the hall, across from Makino's. 4 other rooms were above the bar, and while cramped, they were more than enough for the modest price attached. The door was closed, so he assumed the boy was working on his lessons. Except as he stood outside the door he heard muted talking, and possibly laughing. Worried now, he pushed open the door. Luffy laid sideways on the bed, legs hanging off the side in a way that would normally be uncomfortable, but likely not anymore for the boy. He was muttering something to himself, and Shanks couldn't quite make it out even without the door in the way. Luffy, the head craned upwards unnaturally, and red eyes met his over a wide unnatural grin. Shanks repressed a shudder. A slap to the mattress elevated the boy enough to land sitting cross-legged, and everything about it screamed wrong because Shanks knew the mattress was a worn old thing with no bounce to speak of. Those red eyes continued to watch him and the grin stretched even wider. "Sheehehe, so you're the one who found me," the boy said, the laugh echoing in his words. "Who are you?" Shanks replied, shutting the door behind him. That just earned more laughter, long and grating as the boy bent in half with the humor of the question. "What are you doing to Luffy?" the pirate snapped, hand on his sword. Whoa, he's not stab-proof." "Not yet," the stranger with Luffy's face said, red eye peeking around the hand across his grinning face. "We're not in tune enough for that." "Who are you, sun god Nika?" was the reply, the body sitting up, a serious look in the eyes but still a wide grin. One that widened more. "But you can call me Gum Gum." The laughing started again. "Humans are so funny, like renaming me would change anything, sheehehe." Shanks pulled the small chair in the room to himself and sat down hard. "You're the devil fruit." "Yep." The voice, Nika, giggled, like Shanks was being led onto a secret. "You're not a paramecia, are you?" "Hardly," Nika laughed. "Sun god, pirate man." "A mythical zone then." Shanks swallowed hard. While the few zone he knew were mythical types, he remembered Marco telling him that those fruit had a will of their own. A bunkmate in your head, watching with your eyes. He'd never mentioned the phoenix being in control, though. Shanks was even more worried. "Is Luffy alright?" "Sheehehe, he's fine now. He's so funny, such a crabby little human." No humor at all. It was causing a dissonance. Ripping him apart. Nika's smile fell. "I was killing him." Killing him? Why was he bastard laughing then? A bit of conquer hockey leaked out of Shanks, and the fruit puppeting his young friend started giggling again. It made Shanks want to punch him. There was nothing funny about this. Luffy was dying and Shanks didn't know what to do. Once a fruit was eaten, it would stay with a person till death. Wait, was that it? He'd heard from some that the fruit picked their person. Did this one hate Luffy so much? "He's just a boy, please." "Oh relax, I like Luffy," Nika told him with a wave. "He wants to have fun, really, to be free. He just doesn't know how, yet. So I'm just making the hard edges less sharp." "You're changing his personality." "A bit, maybe," the fruit admitted, "but it's that or death, and trust me, none of us want that. I'll probably sleep for a while afterwards, so remind him how to have fun." "Why fun?" "Well," Nika chuckled, "life is supposed to be fun. If it's not, there's no point in me being here. I want him to experience how fun it is to be alive. How freeing it can be to laugh. If Luffy can't do that, then I'll have to go back to waiting for someone who can." The being frowned for the first time. "I don't want to do that. It was getting boring. And Luffy could maybe one day play with me. He has the potential. So I want him to live, and grow, and have fun." "You're making it easier for him, then?" Shanks asked. "MMMHMM. I don't like to interfere. Humans are their own beings. That's half the fun of watching you all. But die before he has at least a little bit of fun. He's too young to be so grumpy." "I'm just reminding him of the good times." Nika smiled again, a softer one. "You're a lot of the good times, you know. He really feels happy around you and the barmaid. Luffy just needs to hold on to that. Or he'd be ripped apart by the fruit Shanks had so carelessly left on the bar. Except, what would happen when Shanks left for good? He knew very well he couldn't take the boy with him. Not when he'd already left his own daughter behind for her own good. If Luffy stayed here, eventually he'd die. But if he didn't, he'd likely be killed faster by another pirate or a marine. Shanks had to think of something, some way to fix this. "Quit worrying so much, I'm sure it'll all be fine. Luffy will be fine. He's got me. I won't let him give up until he really wants to anyway. Why, he's the whole reason I woke up in the first place. My new partner is stubborn, so I'm sure he'll be alright while I rest. Rest? Sheehehe. Luffy is much too young to handle my powers. Even if he wasn't, well, more laughter. Grumpy brat would rip apart the world. That's no fun at all, so I'm gonna nap for a bit. He'll know how to wake me if he wants to play. But I think, yes. Luffy wants to have fun on his own first. He does, I think so, at least. You'll help him with that, right? I'll try. But I make no promises. That's fine, Nika yawned. He's his own person, and stubborn. Just watch for him when you can. Sheehehe, we're gonna be the best of friends, Luffy. I just know it. Shanks watched as red eyes slid close and Luffy's body flopped boneless to the side. He was across the small room in a flash, but Luffy was fine and woke at his touch. You alright, Anchor? Shanks, I had the funniest dream. Did you? Yeah, I was talking to the sun, and it wanted to play with me. I was angry at first though, because every time we tried playing he burned me. But then he gave me these big fluffy oven mitts. Sheehehe, it was so silly. Shanks swallowed, unnerved a bit. He kept it off his face. It does sound pretty silly, Luffy. It worked though, well, only for a bit, because the mitts started to burn up. But that's okay. I told the sun I'd find even better mitts and we'd play again sometime. You might have to look quite a while for mitts that hold up to the sun, kiddo. That's okay. I'll find them, Luffy told him with a nod. The sun was lonely, and I don't like that. Being lonely hurts, Shanks. It hurts when no one wants to play or talk to you. So, if the sun wants to play with me, I'll play with him. Well, I'm sure that'll make the sun very happy, Shanks told the boy, swallowing thickly, and maybe you'll find more friends to play with you too while you look, huh? I don't know. People don't like me, Shanks. Only Makino and the mayor when you're not here. Then you'll have to look elsewhere. Fuchsia is a small boring town. It's good for a rest, but not for having fun. You'll just have to find places that are fun and make more friends there, he said in a slight panic, like an adventure, right? He sighed in relief when Luffy nodded. The boy hopped off his bed. I'm gonna go tell Makino about my dream, bye Shanks. *************** Sabo pulled a face at the taste of the sake. The first cup with his brothers had burned and all three had gagged on the taste. He almost regretted making fun of the face Luffy had made as the younger boy had literally pulled his tongue out as far as it would go and used his shirt to try and rub out the lingering taste. Almost because it had been pretty funny. He did definitely regret the drinking contest it had triggered. Sabo was definitely drunk, and he was not enjoying the experience. His stomach rolled constantly. But Ace was still drinking and like hell he was going to let the other boy win. He didn't know if it was a blessing or not when the bottle ran out. Still Sabo put his head down on the stump, willing the world to stop spinning. I am never drinking again, Ace groaned out. Sabo made a sound that could have been an agreement. We still have the hangover to look forward to. Why do adults do this to themselves? Ace whimpered at the reminder. Sheehehehe, you two are funny, Luffy chimed in from where he was laying flat on his back. Shut up Luffy, I don't want to hear that from you. You fell asleep halfway through the bottle, Sabo pointed out, waving at Ace for being loud. Sheehehe, you're right. He did, sheehehe, he's so funny. Sitting up he shared a concerned look with Ace. Luffy hadn't drunk as much as they had, but it was still an awful lot and he was pretty small for his age, too. Looking over, Luffy was still flat on his back, a wide grin across his face, hand covering his eyes. You alright there, Luffy? The hand shifted, and a red eye met Sabo's blue ones. He really loves you too, sheehehe. I thought he liked Shanks, but no, you too. The grin widened and Luffy sat up. Legs crossed as he continued to chuckle, you're his everything. You're making less sense than normal, idiot, Ace snapped, though Sabo could see he was getting worried. I'm glad he met you, sheehehe. It's no fun for me when he's sad and lonely, Luffy told them. Except, Sabo didn't think it was actually Luffy talking to them. The hair on the back of his neck prickled as those red eyes looked at them. The warmth in them was more than a little crazed and possessive. He didn't like it, didn't like this thing that spoke with his brother's voice. The wide grin became a bit softer, the look a bit less crazed. Luffy's right. You two are the best to play with. So, keep showing him how to live, nay. He still needs to keep his promise to me. With that Luffy's eyes slid closed and he flopped bonelessly onto his back. Sabo waited, tense, ready to move. He didn't trust or like whatever that had been. He wanted to run, but he wouldn't leave Luffy. They were brothers, and it was his and Ace's job to look out for Luffy. After what felt like an eternity, Luffy let out a snore, muttering something about meat. Sabo let out a relieved sigh. What the hell was that, Ace? Who the hell cares? It's not like we needed to be told to look out for him. Anyway, he's our stupid little brother. Of course we're gonna make sure he knows how to live, right Sabo? He hesitated for a moment before nodding. Right, of course, Ace. Sabo knew Ace had been unnerved by whatever that had been. But his brother was right. Luffy was their little brother. They didn't need anyone telling them to look after him, especially some creepy red-eyed voice. Though, it made him feel good when the voice talked about how much Luffy cared about them. He just hoped he could live up to that. Shanks watched the young man laugh at the teasing of his crew. He knew without a doubt the man, really barely more than a boy, was Rogers. It was in the way he grinned, in his sharp temper that had flared up briefly when Rockstar said something rude about Luffy. That protectiveness of his beloved little brother was all rogue though. Still, Ace was definitely very much his own person, and Shanks was never one to go chasing ghosts. He was more than willing to accept the rookie for who he was, especially since he pretty much liked what he saw. Then again, anyone Luffy called brother was someone to keep an eye on. Catching Ace's eye, Shanks cocked his head slightly to the cave opening. The teen looked confused, but excused himself quickly enough. Shanks, Ben warned as the captain stood. Relax, I'm not going to do anything. I just want to see if he knows. His first mate let out a sigh, no doubt thinking Shanks meant who the boy's parents were, but said nothing else as Shanks left the cave. Ace was a little ways off, sitting on a boulder. The snow around it had not only melted but the rocks below were dry as well. A pretty good show of control, one that had Shanks whistling in appreciation as he joined the teen on the rock. Ace just laughed as Shanks Leniu likes to use me as a heater, too. I can see why. They sat in silence for a moment before Ace sighed. What did you want to talk about that you didn't want the others to hear? Nothing much. Just wanted to know if you knew. I'd rather not talk about that bastard, if it's all the same, Ace spat. I don't care if he was your captain. I was talking about Luffy. Shanks cut him off blandly. He supposed he wasn't surprised at the reaction. He understood it, even, and honestly if Ace had grown up hearing even half the crap about the captain, well, you're your own person, Ace. The only relation that matters to me is your brother. Brothers, Ace admitted, looking heartbroken. We lost Sabo about 6 years ago, Tenryubito. I am sorry for your loss. Sorrier still I never met him, Shanks told Ace, meaning every word. Ace sniffed. S'alright. You wanted to ask something about Lu? Yes, except now he didn't know how to say it, his devil fruit, has he? He's getting better at using it, Ace told him as the young man let out a chuckle. Still does some weird shit, though. Oh, he swallowed, like what? Well, it's not often, sometimes he just does crazy shit. Like, could have sworn he squeezed past this boulder blocking a cave that he shouldn't have been able to. Could have been the lighting, though. And I know he's bouncy, but sometimes it's like the ground bounces back. It's hard to explain, just looks wrong. He says some pretty weird shit when it happens, even by Luffy standards. Shanks sighed, sounds rough. This one time after I could have sworn this tree wrapped around Luffy instead of the other way around. He said his mittens were still too flimsy? Ace gave Shanks an indignant look. It was in the middle of the damn summer. I just rescued his dumb ass from being eaten by a crocodile again. Of course Luffy says he doesn't remember any of it afterwards when he gets like that. Shanks was inclined to believe Ace on this. Something told him Nika wasn't sleeping. Or not as often as Shanks had hoped. Still, Luffy's alright though. Still him, red eyes and all? Yeah, mostly. Always getting into some crazy shit and laughing it off. Dayton, that's our foster mom, said it's probably brain damage from Gigi hitting him so much. But he's alright. Even had a doctor in Hightown check him over and everything. He's just Luffy, you know? He is a little troublemaker, Shanks said, but I'm glad he is doing alright. I know it probably sounds foolish, since I've stayed away for so long, but I worry. Nah, I get it. You couldn't take him with, and you couldn't have known Garp was going to move him. Fuchsia is nice enough, but I think it would have killed Luffy, staying there. Especially if he didn't have that goal you gave him. Ace leaned back, looking up at the sky. I understand why the villagers are scared, but I still hate them. The bandits took us both in, and even though I knew it scared them, and some of them definitely resented us, they didn't ignore us. I might be a monster, but Luffy. You're not a monster, Ace. Neither you or Luffy are responsible for what your fathers did. Regardless of how I felt about your father, people are allowed to hate him. You're allowed to hate him. But you can't hate yourself because of him. But, that would be like blaming Luffy for everything Dragon does. Luffy doesn't even know he has a dad, Ace snapped. I wouldn't let Garp tell him. Luffy shouldn't have to live with that. And neither should you. If Luffy can't be blamed, you can't. But you don't have to believe me now, kid. Just know I am in full agreement with you on what idiots Fuchsia has in it. Yeah well. In 2.5 years Luffy won't have to worry about them anymore. 2.5 years? I told him he's not allowed to set sail till he's 17? I see, Shanks somehow didn't think that was going to work out the way Ace was hoping. Judging by the teen's face he was thinking the same thing, so Shanks didn't voice it. He might have been slightly worried that if he said something, he'd cause it to be. You never knew when gods were involved. Instead he stood, come on, food should be ready soon. Good, I'm starving, Ace said, standing as well. Together they went back in the cave and to the party within. Shanks was still glad of their conversation even if it worried him more than a bit. Still, he was so happy Luffy had found Ace, that they had each other. Marco? You got a moment? Marco turned, mildly surprised that Ace has sought him out. Yes, ever since Ace has officially joined the crew he'd mellowed quite a bit. But he still generally didn't go out of his way to start a conversation. He kept it off his face as he smiled at his newest little brother. Yeah, what's up, Yoi? I had some questions about your devil fruit, the teen said, smiling brightly at him. This naturally made Marco a bit suspicious, especially as he'd seen the teen in the company of Thatch and Rikuyo earlier that day. The man leaned against the railing. I don't lay eggs, Yoi. Ace's brow crinkled in obvious confusion. What? Of course not, you're a guy, right? And I thought phoenix eggs came from the ashes of a dead phoenix, anyway. That's what the stories say, Marco replied, intrigued now, though I'm surprised you've heard them. My brother used to read fairy tales out loud before bed. Luffy, Ace snorted, is actually capable of reading. But no, Sabo was the one who would read them. Marco had only heard Ace mention his other brother once. Enough to know that years later the loss hurt like a fresh wound. You had questions? Yeah, Ace seemed to shake off the melancholy thoughts. I'm not exactly sure how to ask. I think I have a pretty good grasp on my fruit and how it affects me. At least, I think I do, for the most part. And when I asked Oyaji what he was saying kinda made sense. But it didn't, and… Marco thought he understood where this was going. How long have you had your fruit? About 1.5 years? Little less, but close enough, Ace replied easily. Your control is really impressive, Marco said, eyes widening in surprise. Given Ace's level of control, he'd have thought it has been a few years at least. But that did explain why he had questions. You want to know why it's affecting you, right, Yoi? Not really, the younger replied, hopping on the rail. I was an angry kid. The Mara no Mi doesn't hold a match to me 10 years ago. Really, a pun, Yoi? You've been hanging out with Thatch too much, Marco chuckled, shaking his head slightly. It's good you've got a handle on it. Even if it was slightly worrying. Marco had thought the temper Ace had exhibited those first 100 days had been at least in part the frustration of a young logia type finding the balance needed between the fruit and teenage hormones. That it wasn't as comforting as it could be. It must have shown on his face, or Ace was a lot better at reading people than he let on. The teen laughed. Oh, I've still got a long way to go. If I'm pissed it's a lot harder to not just explode. So, that's a problem. But I've always had a problem with that. Just ask any of the people back home. Home? Ace had never mentioned much about his home except for the fact he'd left his younger brother there. Oh, Goa Kingdom. But mostly the jungle. Luffy and I spent a lot of time in Grey Terminal, Ace grinned brightly, unaware of Marco re-evaluating everything he knew about the teen. He'd never been to Goa, and not because it was in the East Blue. No, if anything, Marco would have loved to explore the island that had beasts that rivaled those in the New World while being nearly clear on the other side of the road. He stayed away because he knew very well the capital was a mini Mariajoy. Marco knew himself well enough that it would be triggering. The very thought of it made him want to scratch and pick at himself. It was easy enough to imagine how a free spirit like Ace would react to those kinds of people. I used to get intentionally it wasn't worth it, no matter how mad they made me. They were too weak, you know? I was still pissed as hell, but, anyway. It's a bit like that, for the most part. Well, eventually the goal will be to not get pissed, Yue. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if you want to awaken your fruit you'll need to be able to stay calm, Yue. He laughed at the look on Ace's face. I can help you learn how to do that, Yue. I might not be a logia but. Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask about. You're a zone type, right? Mythical zone, Yue. But yes, Toritori no am I. Phoenix, he raised an eyebrow, wondering where this was going. Cool, so, devil fruits, they're kinda alive, right? Most people would say no, and they're not wrong. Marco held up a hand to prevent Ace from interrupting. They're not alive how most would think, Yue. But, they definitely have a will. I'm not the scientist Vegapunk is, but, I am a doctor, Yue. I've treated a lot of people and animals. Some with fruits, some without. Hell, I've treated Macy a time or two. I still don't see how a fail ate a fruit. Drunken party at an abandoned marine outpost. No one is sure how that happened. We don't even know what fruit exactly. Terrier dog, for sure, Ace offered. The point is, I think I can safely say the fruits are alive in a way, Yue. If they didn't, sharing a fruit with someone would be possible, I think. That's what I thought, Ace agreed. Now, paramecia types seem to be the most agreeable. Almost as if the fruit is content to wait to be used, Yue. Logia, as I'm sure you've noticed, are less willing to wait. You're telling me, Ace grumped, kept catching fire every time I fell asleep. Marco started laughing at that, remembering the panic of the crew the first few times Ace had a narcoleptic attack on deck. I imagine that encouraged you to learn quickly, Yue. Are zone the same? Not really. Zone are more, not aware exactly, but awake? They're just as likely to prevent you from using them at first. Where Logia might struggle to not use their powers. Zone often have the opposite problem, Yue. Some describe it like taming their fruit. Huh, so I guess Luffy's fruit really is a paramecia like everyone says. Your brother has a fruit? He ate it as a kid, gum no am I, Ace shrugged. It's supposed to be a paramecia, but it's weird. Weird, how? Well, for one, he can't turn it off. And knocking him out? No effect, he's still all rubbery and stretchy. Some paramecia are like that, Yue. Though it is uncommon, Marco told him. If you say so. I thought he was a logia for the longest time, but I know that's not actually possible. It's just, never mind, it's stupid. Even Vegapunk doesn't know everything about devil fruit, Yue. If you say your brother's fruit is weird, I believe you. Ace stared at him for a moment, and Marco waited. No matter what Ace said, it probably wouldn't be the weirdest thing he'd heard of. After a while the teen sighed. I know this is going to sound nuts, but sometimes Luffy isn't Luffy. And when we were kids, I kinda thought it was because Gigi got him with the fist of love one too many times. And well, lighting in the jungle can be weird, even in the middle of the day. So we figured it was nothing. And whenever we asked Luffy about it he had no clue what we were talking about. Your grandfather hit you with his fist? If he could catch us. And he was definitely using armament, so that shit hurt. Ace shrugged like he hadn't just dropped another horrifying tidbit about his life. Traumatic brain injuries can cause that, Yue. Perhaps Marco would go to Goa, if for no other reason than to make sure Luffy wasn't going to drop dead of a brain aneurysm caused by repeated blunt force trauma. Right? So, we kinda thought that was it, especially after Makino said he'd been different before. Except, then I got to talking with Shanks. I'm confused. Why were you talking to Shanks about the brain damage your grandfather gave your brother? Oh, we weren't talking about that. He'd asked about Luffy's devil fruit, and since it's definitely his fault Luffy ate it, of course I'm gonna tell him how the kid is doing. And I maybe wanted to see if I could freak him out and mention how Luffy gets when his eyes are red. Marco felt so lost, but nodded anyway when Ace glanced at him, looking to see if he was paying attention, and what did he say? He asked if Luffy was still Luffy, still him, red eyes and all? Those were his exact words, and I know I didn't tell him his eyes change sometimes. He seemed a bit surprised when I said he was weird enough Dayton had a doctor check him out, and I know that it's probably a brain injury or something, but it got me thinking that maybe it was his fruit, because Shanks didn't seem surprised he was acting weird, and Makino definitely said it started right after the fruit incident. Except, that wouldn't make sense if he was a paramecia, and since I knew he wasn't a logia. You needed to know what a zone was like, Marco finished for him. But Luffy was rubber the moment after he ate the fruit. Makino was there the whole time and said he stretched like taffy within minutes. Probably not a zone then, Marco told him, ignoring the small voice in his head that was indignant at the thought of a rubber zone. I guess it's just Luffy being Luffy then. Anyway, thanks for answering my questions, Marco, and for not laughing. I was happy to, Yoi. He's my little brother, you know, I worry, Ace said as he hopped off the rail and stretched. It's an older sibling's job. Well, the good news is if it's a brain injury, as long as he's having fun, it won't kill him. I'm not sure that's how it works, Yoi. The teen laughed as he walked away. Sure it is, red-eyed Luffy said so himself. Marco shook his head at the foolishness as he watched his young friend leave. Later, he'd mention the conversation to Oyaji. Possibly talk about snatching the brat up and making sure he wasn't going to drop dead because Garp couldn't control himself. Right now he was going to go for a flight though, because something about the whole conversation has really riled up the Phoenix. He couldn't tell what it was, just that it wanted up and to be away. So he'd stretch his wings and put it out of his mind. Luffy sat next to Sabo's gravesite, humming to himself. He missed his brothers fiercely and hated how lonely he was most days. But Sabo had been gone a long time, so it was a pain he'd learned to live with most days. Ace's loss was newer, sharper for all that he knew it was less permanent. On the days where the pain burned in his chest like he'd eaten something too hot he came here, it helped somewhat. Ace always knew how to make it better when he felt like this. He'd be upset that Luffy hadn't gone to Dayton or Makino like he was supposed to when he felt alone. But, the village was never as good as it had when he was with his brother. With a sigh, he flopped onto his back. Maybe he'd feel better after a nap. Nika sat up, letting out a huff of exasperation at themselves. It would be less work to join Luffy in their shared dreams. Freeing to play with the boy instead of borrowing the body for a short time. Luffy was still a long way off from being the perfect partner, but they were so happy with the kid. Luffy was strong. That much was obvious. Nika didn't regret letting the little human use their powers because of it. The reward was some funny attacks that used to never work. Luffy kept trying, though, and even as young as he was he'd been able to handle a level of power that had torn apart fully grown experienced humans. Okay, granted, those humans had been boring and mean, so Nika hadn't cared enough to prevent the power from burning too brightly. Luffy was still a child though. Even a fraction of Nika's abilities was much too dangerous for a reckless child. No matter how much fun Nika was having, they knew that. It was a careful balancing act that would normally be too boring for Nika to follow through on. Luffy though. Luffy kept it interesting. Always tugging just a bit more strength from Nika. The power stretching and pulling around the child like it was excited to be used. Nika's powers. Luffy's powers. The line was stretching and blurred more every day. The being let out a laugh at that, leaning on the memory of one of Luffy's special people. He patted the sea-worn stone with a wide grin, red eyes looking out to the sea. One day, I might not know where that line is. Isn't that exciting? Such a funny little human. I'm so glad he ate me. So happy to be free. See the world with him. The promise he made you hurts, though. A chain on his heart. A knife to our bond. I don't like being caged. When you both were here, it wasn't a cage, though. Not to Luffy. But you're gone, and a lonely heart is no place for a god to sleep. Nika stopped smiling, hand resting on where Luffy's heart beat erratically in his small chest. Nika did everything to try and keep the beat as close to the pace a normal human had. Though they knew Sabo and Ace had not been good examples of normal. Not when their souls called to him, opening like flowers under the warmth that leaked through Luffy. It had helped soften those rough edges that had cut into the bond in the beginning. At first Nika had cared for the other boys because Luffy cared. Years later though, even that distinction blurred and bled. It was scary but exciting. Nika had never cared for anyone beyond the fruit user, for all that there had been so few that earned that title from the fruit. With Luffy though, it was freeing to care in a way Nika hadn't expected. The mythical zone fruit gave a damn about the promise Luffy had made, holding fast to honor it even as it burned the god. The being who allowed itself to be bound by chains of love sighed, 2 more years, then we'll be free again. I'll take as much of the pain I can. So don't you worry about Luffy. He's still my favorite human, after all. With one last pat on the stone, Nika turned back to the forest. There was enough time to catch some food before Luffy would have to wake and face the loneliness again. Deiden fought the urge to throw the dendon against the wall. Luffy had gone missing a week ago. At first, she hadn't thought much of it. The brat did that sometimes after Ace left. Just fucked off into the woods for a day or so without a word. There was a pattern to it, as weird as it was for Luffy to follow any sort of routine. Deiden would wake early in the morning to find the brat right outside the cabin. Eyes looking wild as he snickered at her unimpressed glower, grin sharper and wider than normal as he turned his attention to the woods. Every time he'd say, "I'm going to borrow him for a bit, shee." And every time she would reply, "Don't forget to bring him back this time. I'm not going looking for the little shit." And the brat would laugh loudly at her words before vanishing into the woods. Deiden didn't trust that laugh, not really. More because it made Garp nervous. She knew her old friend was hiding things about Luffy. She knew the boy had changed after eating that damn fruit, though, for the better, if Makino was to be believed. So, as much as it went against her nature to trust an unknown with one of her boys, she did. Whatever it was, it cared about Luffy. So if Red Eyes said it was borrowing Luffy, the brat would be fine. Luffy always came back cheerfully talking their ears off about mystery meat and oven gloves, happier than when he left. He was also always back in a day and a half at most. Deiden knew it was because Luffy was lonely. Even if she and her bandits weren't the best company, her men at least interacted with the brat. It was more than Fuchsia's people did. The brats got underfoot and were annoying, but they were brats. It was what happened. Deiden wasn't the kind of monster to chase them off for that. If all 3 of her boys had been weird ones, she'd made doubly sure her men paid attention to them. So Luffy would be back at dinner time most nights, snatching all the food he could with his rubbery limbs, laughing and getting on the way. No later than the next day. This time though, Deiden knew she couldn't blame the red-eyed one. There had been no early morning meeting. No cheering promise. And no Luffy. Over a week and her boy was still missing. Worse, 2 of the new recruits had gone missing a few days before. Deiden had a sinking feeling it was related to why her brat was nowhere on the island. She should call Garp. She wouldn't, though, because if those fake bandits hadn't been bandits, if they were slavers after a devil fruit user, they'd be backed by the Marines. Unlikely, as Deiden's group kept a close eye on that shit. Especially on this island, where they had friends and family that would need protecting. Slavers did not come to Goa Kingdom as a result. Something even those bastards in Hightown didn't protest, not if they wanted an island left to rule over. That left actual Marines. Garp couldn't be trusted in that case. Ace was a possibility, except he hadn't had a dendon when he left. A letter would take too long, too. So, Dragon it was. Grinding her teeth, she dialed the number and waited. "You don't call," the man said as way of greeting. "Luffy's gone," she told him. "Hightown is the last place to look and the brat hates that place. So if it's standing, he's not there." "When? I noticed a week ago," she admitted, hating herself. "Some bandits are missing, too. Newer. Been with the group less than a year." "I'll find him," Dragon told her, anger in his voice as he hung up. Deiden sighed in relief at that. He'd find her boy. Dragon was a bastard, but it was his son. "What do you mean? You sent men after my grandson, Sengoku?" Garp growled out, fist slamming into the desk. The man he had thought of as a friend didn't react as the desk shattered. Instead he met Garp's enraged look calmly. When Garp reached out to grab him, he held up a hand. "I had nothing to do with this, Garp. Indeed, if I was going to make such a foolish move, I would have done so long before your other grandson left that damn island." Then, what happened? Some lieutenant in the East Blue apparently took offense to a super rookie coming out of their sea. So they figured out where he came from, probably for blackmail. And they dared to call themselves a marine. Yes. Especially when their snooping uncovered Dragon's son. Sengoku sounded exhausted. I couldn't not send anyone to look into it after that, Garp. It would have been suspicious, you know that. Luffy doesn't have anything to do with his father. He doesn't even know he has one. Senny. He's just a stupid little boy. Garp shouted at him. I know, and even the spies I sent said that. But Garp, they also saw how his body bent and stretched. Garp snorted, crossing his arms. I told you. He ate a paramecia fruit. Gum gum no mi. He's rubber. Garp. There's no such fruit, Sengoku told him, and Garp's heart lurched in his chest. His friend sighed, and you knew. He's a boy, Senny. Just a foolish boy. He's not that kind of threat. Garp, I understand where you're coming from. But the 5 elders won't take the risk that he'll grow up to be that sort of threat. So they won't let him grow up at all? How is that justice? His friend gave him a warning look, voice cutting. He's to be re-educated at Marineford before being conscripted. So they'll take his freedom then, he replied bitterly. It's better than impelled down. Sengoku snapped before sighing. It was the best I could do. Garp wanted to rage at that. Scream at how that was worse than a death sentence, worse than that hated prison. Sengoku wouldn't understand, though. He no doubt had done everything he could to grant what he saw as just mercy for Garp's grandson. A boy he has repeatedly urged Garp to bring to Marineford along with his older brother. Sengoku would acknowledge how dangerous that would have been to do before the boys were strong enough to defend themselves, though. And by the time Ace had been strong enough, the brat was sailing under a pirate flag and making a name for himself. He definitely wouldn't understand how the rules Marines lived by would have stifled Ace, crushed his spirit in a way Garp couldn't bring himself to do. How it would actually kill Luffy. Garp knew. He knew deep down that sort of life would be the death of Luffy. It wouldn't be a fast death, either. His poor grandson would suffer every minute. He wasn't like Garp or Dragon. It has taken Garp a long time to realize it, and it shamed him to admit it. He'd never realized how much Luffy had suffered before he dropped him off at Dayton's. Never realized Luffy couldn't thrive under the distant care the village offered him. Never took Makino's warning to heart. Luffy had thrived with Dayton. He had gone from being a moody brat to almost always laughing and smiling. Yes, the smiles were too wide. Yes, the laugh was off-putting at times. Garp knew the fruit had changed his grandson, that a paramecia didn't act this way. Paramecia fruit were easygoing by nature. They caused changes in their host's way of thinking, making it more instinctive to reach for the power they granted. Never had he heard of a paramecia being so hard to use. Of one changing their host's personality even the slightest bit. Garp knew sometimes something else looked at him from behind that grin, something that wasn't what it was supposed to be. But, as Luffy got older, became happier, he found he didn't care. Whatever that fruit actually was, it was obvious how bonded it was to his grandson. And the fruit that was so fond of his grandson would make them all suffer if they took Luffy and broke him. Because breaking him, turning him into something that wasn't Luffy was the only way that Luffy would survive. That was the entire point of re-educating those the higher-ups deemed a threat but too valuable to kill after all. Seize helped them all. The 5 elders were going to get everyone killed trying to tame something that could not be tamed. Because either way Luffy died, he wouldn't be going alone. Still, Garp swallowed those words. Instead he glared at his friend before storming out. He knew he'd be watched. Leaving now would do nothing but put his grandson more at risk. Worse, if they did manage to bring Luffy to Marineford, Garp would still be kept away. Prevented from interfering with the re-educating of the boy. No, there was nothing he could do, but maybe there was someone he could ask for help. Someone who owed him one. Sabo raced down the halls of the marine ship, not stumbling as it started to list hard to port. Likely Hack's doing. Koala was checking the cells below for prisoners while Sabo's job was the information held in the offices. The Marines had grabbed some kid in the East Blue that Dragon was interested in, and even if they were in paradise right now it was possible that there was information to be had. Koala had wanted to double-check the cells though, just in case the Marines had the kid aboard. Sabo had rolled his eyes at that. If a warship like this one had been in the East Blue they would have known. He understood the need though. Whoever this kid was, he was important enough to get kidnapped by the Marines. Meaning he was probably the kid of a well-known pirate. Sabo had his money on Shanks, and rescuing Shanks' brat was a smart move for the Revolutionary Army. Reaching the most ornate door, Sabo grinned, crushing the handle with ease and ripping it off the hinges. The highest-ranked Marine always had the best information hidden away in their room. Though the hostage tied to a chair was a new thing. The grin slipped from his face, looking at the boy hanging limp against the chains holding him to a heavy chair. He still was cautious as he approached, eyeing the splattered blood on the floor with distaste. He didn't know exactly what the kid from the East Blue looked like, but he would eat his hat if this wasn't the kid. Gently he checked for a pulse, ignoring the rush of relief when it beat erratically under his fingers. Erratic pulses were not good, but the kid was alive at least. Quickly Sabo turned his attention to the chains, disgusted at the thick sea stone, more than would be needed even for an experienced logia type, let alone a boy who probably just found a fruit. "You've got the worst luck, huh?" he asked, crushing the chain into powder and sitting the boy up a bit more. Sabo plastered a smile on his face as he reached forward to tap a cheek that still had a bit of baby fat on it, only to freeze as red eyes stared into his. Lips pulled back in a smile that looked manic as the boy giggled, "Shee-hee-hee, found you." "I think you mean I found you," Sabo replied, ignoring the hair raising on the back of his neck. "Shee-hee-hee, sure," the boy chirped, literally bouncing to his feet. "Good, you can stand. Let's get out of here. Why's the ship tilted?" "It's sinking, so okay," the boy replied, moving to the door. His moves looked unsteady, and Sabo hoped it was because of the ship. He ignored the itch in his brain that wanted to shout at the boy to stop that. The boy paused at the door. "I'm angry at you." "What? Excuse me, I just rescued you." The smile slipped from the face, replaced by a frown that was wrong. "You left, Sabo." How did this boy know his name?" Luffy cried. He forgot how to be free for a time. It was hard being with him then. "So I'm mad at you," the voice continued, red eyes glinting. "You were supposed to remind him how to have fun, and then you died." Sabo stumbled back, hand over his damaged eye. "You knew me before. I'm sorry, but I don't remember. Whoever this Luffy is, ID." The boy cracked his knuckles. "Then I did find you. And when you remember, find Luffy. Show him you're still free." A fist collided with Sabo's face. It came hard and fast, and he could feel his skull give way. It felt horrible and wrong, but disconnected and not anywhere near as painful as he thought his skull being crushed would feel. Sabo could swear he felt as his brain squeezed around Knuckles, feel his skin stretch and bulge around the trauma. He fell to his knees weakly as the fist pulled away, amazed and disturbed that it wasn't covered in blood. It didn't matter though, his head ached horribly. To the point where Sabo wondered if this is what dying felt like. The other person frowned at him. "There. That might have hurt Luffy a bit, but it will definitely hurt him more if you didn't remember him next time." Sabo's brain lurched at the name. It hurt with its familiarity, and his stomach rebelled with it. Still, it didn't stop him from reaching out as the thing in Luffy's body turned away. "Wait." "Shee-hee-hee, no, he kept the promise, and if you don't tell him to go back, we can keep having an adventure, shee-hee-hee-hee. It's not safe." A red eye met his. "I'll protect him." And Sabo knew it was true. Still he reached out, desperate even if he didn't yet understand why. He just knew he didn't want Luffy to leave, though he wasn't sure he knew who Luffy was, or how this could be a Luffy when the voice claimed it was someone else. None of that mattered, he needed to make him stay. The other faced him, neck turning unnaturally even as he left the room. "Shee-hee-hee, it's your turn to chase after him. Come find him, Sabo. We'll be waiting, but don't make him wait too long. Or I might punch you again, shee-hee-hee." With those last words the boy vanished. Sabo tried to get to his feet, making it to the doorway. He looked around desperately for the boy, but there was nothing but warped-looking walls that made him uneasy. He turned at Koala's shout and offered a weak wave before he lost his fight with the pain. He practically melted into her arms as he lost the fight with consciousness, something in his heart crying out for the boy who had just left. "Shanks, we need to talk." "Garp, calling to yell at me for corrupting your grandson again?" "Luffy's been taken." Shanks sat up at those words, feeling a lot more sober than he had a few minutes ago. He glared at the offending Deedon. "When?" "A month ago, maybe longer," Garp spat. "Marines went looking for the son of Dragon." "Luffy doesn't know, and that village knows how to keep a secret, he knew that himself." If he hadn't been aware of who Garp's son was, he'd have never realized it himself. Shanks only knew because Garp had liked to brag back in the day about the shit his son got up to Roger. How he was refusing to be a Marine, but was still doing good. Tell Roger he knew how to raise a boy to be strong enough to stand on their own. Unlike Shanks and Buggy. Shanks remembered when it had switched to Roger teasing him about Dragon trying to start a revolution. How Grap had stopped talking about his son after that. He let his silence ask the question for him. I haven't talked about that useless bastard in years. Didn't want people asking questions. But someone figured it out after they went looking for where the older brat came from. I don't know how, though. So they took him because of that? To do what? Dragon obviously won't move for this. They don't need him to, came Garp's reminder. In fact, it would be better for them if he didn't. So they can say he doesn't care, Shanks realized. Angry all over again. Because it didn't matter really if Dragon cared or not. Luffy was going to suffer because of him. The only good thing is Senny pulled some strings. They're going to conscript him. Garp's tone said he was well aware it was a death sentence in all but name for his grandson. Shanks didn't need to point that out. Which was good, because all he could think of was the fruit laughing. Laughing about how his power ripped people apart. How Luffy had potential, though. All Shanks could think of was what would happen if Luffy was no longer an entertaining host for the Sun God. I'm in the New World right now, he said instead. Too far to help then, came the exhausted sigh. Shanks looked at his crew which had fallen silent. They didn't even try and hide the fact they were listening. Not that he could blame them. Everyone on the crew knew who Luffy was. Even if half of them had never met the kid. He just had to give the word and they would be ready to race to Marineford. Ready to fight for their boy, even knowing they'd probably be too late to stop anything. Anchor's safety is the issue here, right? No, that could be just as bad. Do you have a better plan? Fine, was Garp's gruff reply. Do what you will. You're going to anyway. Shanks let out a shaky sigh. Yeah, I am. I'm a pirate after all. And he would do everything in his power to protect what was precious to him. He'd have no regrets doing it either, especially if it meant Luffy lived. Luffy crossed his arms, looking out at the water surrounding him with a frown. He had no clue how he got here. Or even where here was. He remembered being on Dawn Island. He definitely remembered the two Marines grabbing him and tying him up with something that made him feel weak and sleepy. He remembered being really pissed about that, too angry to even be hungry. After that though things kinda blurred together. He'd felt sick and awful, and the Marines kept saying weird things about a dragon and something about his fruit. He hadn't paid much attention because Luffy knew the Marines were all liars. His Gigi even said so, and that was saying something if Gigi admitted it. How did he get here on this small boat though? I remember that mean Marine guy punching me. He frowned harder, because that was the last thing he remembered. The water lapped at the wood, a soothing sound as Luffy stood there under the sun. After a while, he shrugged. It's a mystery. Shee. With that settled, Luffy sat between the oars. I might not know where I am, but if I keep going in one direction I'm sure I'll find something to eat, he told his stomach, which made a rumble that had him grinning all over again. Luffy didn't know how to navigate. He didn't know where he was, though, so that was fine. He didn't have anything to eat, which was less than fine. But he'd find something, so that was okay, too. The only bad thing was he was alone. He didn't like that, even if it was better than letting a Marine hit him. Still, finding food and figuring out where he was had always been his favorite type of adventure whenever he'd woken up in a weird place before. This was just going to be a bigger adventure than he was used to. So, it would probably be more fun than the others. Being alone sucked, but even that wasn't too bad, not if he was having an adventure. He'd gotten used to ignoring the weird feelings being alone gave him for the most part. He always had the best dreams when he was really lonely, too. So even though he hated the feeling, he kinda liked the funny dreams, even if he never really remembered what they were about when he woke. Just the feeling of contentment and determination. And Ace had told him he'd have to get used to being alone sometimes, even after he set sail and gained a crew. Because not everyone would be able to keep up with him like his brothers had been able to. That was alright. That wasn't really being alone. Luffy hadn't been sure how to explain the difference though. Not when Ace actually liked being alone a lot. Though he never minded being with Luffy, saying they could be alone together. Ace was silly that way. Luffy really missed his brothers. So much. but he'd promised to wait till he was 17 to set sail. Luffy paused, letting the oars rest in their cradles as he scratched his head, looking around at the sea surrounding the small boat. He wasn't on Dawn Island. I didn't set sail. Ace was going to be pissed he wasn't on Dawn Island like he said he would be. I didn't break my promise, though, Luffy pouted. No one else would know that. They'd probably tell Ace Luffy had lied and left early. Bad things happened if you left early, and Ace would worry. Luffy grabbed the oars again. It was more important to find Ace and tell him he hadn't set sail than go back to Dawn Island. Because if he went back no one would believe him, and they'd tell Ace he'd left on purpose. So he had to find Ace first and tell him the truth. Ace always did say to come find him if he got lost, anyway. He grinned to himself, rowing harder. It wasn't setting sail if he was already off the island anyway. And it wasn't setting sail if he was listening to his big brother and going to him when he had a problem. He laughed a bit, pleased with himself for figuring it out. Marco, any idea why Oyaji's got us listening to all the marine chatter this week? Haruta asked, clutching a hot coffee like it was a lifeline as the two of them went over to the captain's chair. Given how hard their division had been working the last few days, Marco got it. Marines took a kid, Yui, he told the other commander. Haruta pulled a face. That's sucky, but it happens all the time. That doesn't say why we're looking. Wait, is the kid related to one of our allies? Technically, no, but also yes, Oyaji answered. Glancing up from his tankard, Shanks knows the brat that was taken. Since we're in paradise at the moment, he asked if we could help. He just knows the kid, or knows the kid? Haruta asked. It's not his son, Yui, Marco shook his head, but still important enough to him he cashed in most of his favors. That's impressive, Haruta allowed, though there hasn't been anything about a kid, or Shanks. Not surprised, Yui. Whatever happened was a while back. But Shanks insisted we look, so Oyaji thought it was better to see if there was anything unusual. Ah, so that explains why you weren't more specific I guess, huh Oyaji? The seas are vast, my child. Shanks knew when he asked it was unlikely we'd be able to locate the brat. Still, he asked us to listen for anything weird. I hate to say it but there's been nothing weird, the 12th Division commander shook their head, just the usual crap. Nothing at all? Haruta shrugged. The Revs have been a bit more active recently, but that's it. Oyaji leaned forward. Active how, my son? Some confirmed sightings in the East Blue around the Polestar Islands. A few ships sunk in paradise I've been able to tie to them. Nothing big enough to suggest they're on the move, though. But enough to suggest they're looking for something. Yoi, Marco scratched his chin, looking at Oyaji. Do you think they're looking for the same kid? It is hard to say, Oyaji replied, sitting back once again. We've never looked too closely at their movements so far from our home territories. So it could be unrelated. We need to ask someone more familiar with that area. Then, Haruta sighed, the spades are the freshest out of these parts. So I'll ring up Moby too and see if Duce knows anything. 2nd Division should be back from their supply run soon. I'll ask Ace. He's still got family back in the East Blue, Yoi. Oyaji nodded, not giving voice to what both commanders were thinking. If this kid was related to the Revolutionary Army and the Marines took them, they were probably already dead. But Shanks had asked them to look into it, and this was the last possible lead. So they'd check it, and when it inevitably turned up nothing, they'd be forced to let the other Yonko know. Luffy had never been happier to stand on land. Being on the water was fun and all but his boat was tiny. There was nothing to do and no one to talk to, either. Worse still he ran out of food a few days ago so Luffy was starving. He'd made sure to ration the fresh water though. Sabo and Ace always said fresh water was the most important thing when sailing. When he had been down to less than half a barrel Luffy had spotted a news coup high up in the sky. Something in him told Luffy to follow the bird instead of trying to pull it down from the sky for a quick snack. Sheehehe. Navigation isn't too hard. I don't see what Ace was so worried about. His stomach disagreed, reminding him it had been a few days since he ate. Frowning at that, Luffy looked off in the distance. He'd landed on a small beach, but there was smoke in the distance. Smoke meant people, and people meant meat. Which was good, because Luffy didn't feel like hunting right now. Mind made up, Luffy adjusted his hat and took off to where the smoke was coming from. The closer he got the more nosy it got. And Luffy perked up with interest. Still, food first, then adventure. It was easy enough to find some food stands, helpfully empty of any employees who'd want money. Luffy figured they'd probably run away from the sounds of a fight that were getting closer. That just meant Luffy wouldn't have to go looking far after he ate, which was even better for him. Grinning happily to himself, he grabbed all the skewers from the first stand and didn't bother to pull the sticks out. They were soaked in meat juices, so it would have been a waste. Plus he vaguely remembered Deiden saying wood was full of fiber once, and Makino said fiber was an important part of a diet. As the sounds of fighting got closer, Luffy continued to ignore it, moving to the next stall. He pouted when the baked yam he was about to eat ended up breaking into pieces, courtesy of the bullet that tore through it before ducking the next one coming at his head. "Hey! Watch it!" The people who had spilled onto the same street as him stopped and stared at him. Luffy stared right back. It looked like a fight between Marines and pirates, and while he didn't know the pirates, he was still a bit mad at Marines in general. Plus, he thought a Marine probably shot his food. So Luffy punched one of the Marines, ignoring the looks of surprise the pirates gave him as his arm retracted in favor of grabbing some more yams. "You're coming with us, kid," someone said, yanking him backwards and causing him to drop the food again as he was dragged towards the dock. "Hey, I was eating that. We'll feed you once we leave," the man holding him shouted back. That was enough for Luffy, and he started running with the small group of pirates, laughing loudly as they dodged bullets. A few times a Marine got too close for his liking, so he sent them flying. Fighting was fun, but he was hungry. "Ricky, who's that?" another pirate asked as they finally reached the gangplank of a decent-sized pirate ship. "New recruit," the one that had grabbed him said, "should have seen the way he laid out the lieutenant commander. He sent the commander flying, too," another added. "Really saved our bacon there, kid." "Bacon? Where? I'm starving," Luffy cheered, running around the deck looking for whatever bacon he'd rescued while the pirates laughed. "We'll feed you in a minute, Straw Hat Kid. Just let us get a bit further away, huh?" "Fine," he agreed, casually tossing a cannonball back towards the coast. Maybe these pirates would know where he could find Ace. "Welcome back, Ace," Marco grinned, taking the stack of paper from the younger commander. "I don't see why I need to fill out a report for a stupid supply run. Nothing interesting happened," Ace grumped in reply. "That's not what your division said, Yoi." Ace rolled his eyes at that, flopping dramatically on his back across Marco's bed. It was barely a scuffle. "A Marine warship is not a scuffle," he reminded Ace, especially when completely raiding it instead of sinking it. Ace raised an arm, giving Marco a thumbs up. "Sink it next time, got it?" Marco chuckled at that, completely understanding where Ace was coming from. Flipping through the stack of paper he asked, "Did you give the correspondence and bounties to the 12th Division?" "Handed it to Haruta myself before coming here. You're learning, Yoi." Never knew being a pirate involved so much paperwork. Only if you're in charge of anything. Luffy's gonna hate that. I bet he dumps it on the first chump to join him. "Like you did, Duce. Duce and I had a division of labor, I'll have you know. He took over because your handwriting sucks, huh?" Ace flailed at that. "It's not my fault none them read East Blue cipher. And it's faster for me to write in, anyway." Which was very true. Ace took notes at the commander meetings in EBC, and once translated they were the most detailed. To the point Juzo just transcribed the younger man's notes for the meeting minutes. It wasn't surprising the Spades had no experience beforehand with that cipher, since it was a coded language used by the larger criminal groups in the East Blue. It was weirder that Ace was proficient in it. "Speaking of East Blue, you willing to look into something, Yoi?" Ace sat up at that, grinning widely, "Like a trip?" "Sorry, no excuse to visit your brother, Yoi." Worth a shot," Ace settled, legs crossed as he looked at Marco brightly. "What's up?" Marco leaned forward a bit and thought of how to word it. Ace could be pretty sensitive when it came to kids, and the last thing he wanted was for Ace to get attached to a kid who was likely already dead. "We're looking into something for an ally. Marines took someone and we're trying to track them down." Ace's eyes took on a steely glint at that. "Got a Deiden?" "Yes. Hand it here. I'll make a call. If you're sure, Yoi." "I thought you'd want to do it in private," Marco said, handing over a Deiden he kept in his desk. "Yeah, but the thing is," Ace said, rubbing the back of his neck, "I don't actually have a Deiden." "Ace, you've been with us for months now. Just ask for one, Yoi." Well, excuse me for forgetting that the Whitebeards had hundreds of them. They're not common back home, you know, he whined. But you know Deeden numbers. Well, yeah, I know people who have Deeden. Oh, he raised an eyebrow at the contradiction of Denden being uncommon in the East Blue, yet Ace knowing people with them. Sure, Gigi, for one. Though I'd rather die than call him for info. I'm calling Deeden instead, he said while dialing. If it happens in the East Blue, Deeden knows about it. The line clicked as it connected. Who the hell is this? Nice to hear from you too, you old hag. Ace? Why are you calling? Well, it sure as hell isn't just to say hi, he rolled his eyes. My friend has some questions for you. With that he passed the receiver over to Marco. It'll only take a minute, yoy. It better, I've got my hands full with something here. So, what the hell do you want? The Marines took someone out of the East Blue, was wondering if you knew anything? Normally he'd take the silence that followed as disbelief over asking something so commonplace. Except the Deeden started to sweat. Who's asking? Marco narrowed his eyes. Marco of the Whitebeards, yoy. Ace, my Ace, is friends with a Whitebeard? Actually, Ace leaned in, grinning. I sort of joined up. Don't tell Luffy though. I want it to be a surprise. Fuck. Rude. There was a sigh, before Deeden continued. A calculating tone in her voice Marco didn't trust. How did you find out the Marines took someone? Shanks, Marco replied, not noticing at first when Ace tensed. Fuck, that's bad. The receiver was yanked out of his hand. Deeden. Tell me that Gigi didn't kidnap him. Garp didn't take the kid, Deeden said quickly. It didn't help. Flames started to lick at Ace's shoulders. The Denden frowned. If it's gotten to Shanks though, Garp probably can't get to him. I've got to go let the others know. Call me tomorrow. I might have an update by then, Deeden said before the line went dead. Who the hell is this kid, yoy? Marco asked, looking at Ace. Just then Haruta barged into the room, waving a bounty. The missing kid's dragons, and the Marines fucking lost him. Ace seemed to both deflate and suddenly become more tense. It took Marco a moment to tell he was gauging their reaction to the news that Dragon had a son. Though it was obvious he knew the boy. Haruta looked between the two. What? He's my little brother, Ace told them. Dragon isn't your father, yoy, Marco said before Haruta could get any ideas. He could have kicked himself for it though with the look Ace was giving him. Marco might have been able to peg him as Roger's kid, but he sure as hell wasn't going to out his friend like that. Especially since Ace hadn't realized a few of the older crew knew exactly who his father had been. They'd partied with the guy often enough. Instead he shrugged. The Revs get pissy when they think Oyaji's poaching their members. Marco's right. If you were his kid, Dragon would have been passive-aggressively having his people cross our paths as reminders to be good to you. Haruta nodded. Plus he'd have been a hell of a lot more active when you went missing. Like he's doing now with this kid. His name is Luffy, Ace said, taking a deep breath. Your brother, apparently. Haruta's face did some interesting things before it settled into a determined look before shoving the bounty into Marco's hands. Alright, Marco, take this. Let Oyaji know. Now that I have a lead, we're gonna find our baby brother, they shouted, running back out of the room. Ace stared after Haruta. What? Well, Luffy's your brother. So that makes him our brother too, yoy, Marco said gently, so of course we're going to find him. He pretended to not notice as Ace wiped his eyes. As much as it hurt, he understood why their newest member was so self-reliant. But in this, he wasn't alone. And while Marco was sure Dragon was trying his damnedest to rescue the kid, Oyaji would get there first. Because Ace needed them to. Bird, Luffy sighed, laying on his back. He'd had a fun time with that weird crew, but then they'd gotten into this weird game with these other pirates. It had looked fun. Except the Marines had shown up and everyone scattered. Luffy had been hoping someone would find him, but he guessed hiding in the Marine ship hadn't been the best idea. Especially once it started moving. Bored, he huffed, sitting up and reaching into one of the barrels he'd hidden next to. Pulling out an apple he swallowed it whole before falling silent as the door to the pantry opened. Luffy sat there, hidden amongst the barrels as he listened to the Marine rummage around looking for something. It was so tempting to leap out and clobber the man. At least it would make things more exciting. But Luffy still wasn't sure how he made it off the last Marine ship. He didn't know where they kept their life rafts. He wasn't even really sure if Marines had life rafts. GG had never mentioned them, at least. Which meant he'd have nowhere to go after he had all the Marines on board chasing him. Luffy was reasonably sure he could take out all of them. Well, most of them at least. Even if you took them all out though, he still wasn't exactly sure how to sail a ship. Especially when it's this big. And that meant he would have to wait. The Marines would have to go to shore eventually, right? If he could wait. Even if it was boring. He had food and he had water though, and he seemed to find a pretty good hiding spot too. He groaned, flopping back on his back again once the man left. Well, Ace and Sabo always said if he couldn't go do stuff to make time pass faster he should nap. Nodding to himself, Luffy rolled over and promptly fell asleep. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Aw, not having fun? Shut up, I'm still having an adventure. This is just the boring part, Luffy grumbled, fighting to keep the grin off his face. The sun laughed at him. Oh yes. The parts you always had your big brothers skip over in the stories. Because it's boring, shee-hee-hee-hee. I agree, the sun said as he sat next to him, but still worth it. Of course. Even the slow adventures are fun. The sun's smile somehow got warmer, kinder. It reached out and put a hand next to Luffy's, not quite touching. I think so, too. Thank you for taking me with you. Even on these slow boring adventures. Shee-hee-hee-hee, of course. Thanks for coming. It makes it all more fun, not being alone. He laughed slightly. At least, I don't feel so alone. You know, even if you're apart, you're not alone. I know, Luffy admitted, but I still feel lonely. Well, we can't have that. The world around them warped and flexed before they were suddenly up in the clouds. Come, show me how much better you've gotten. Shee-hee-hee, you're on, Luffy cheered, thick fluffy mittens covering his hands as he stood. The loneliness was never as bad in his dreams. Especially when they had fun like this. Sabo was losing his damn mind. That was his only hope. Because, the other option was he'd somehow manage to rescue his little brother and lose him. And not just a little lose him, like a lot lose him. The gods hate me. That's what this is, he said, looking up at Koala as she entered the cramped cabin he and Hack were going over reports in. Hack didn't react, but Koala rolled her eyes and huffed, letting him know he was being dramatic. She placed a report on the crowded desk. Looks like the crew he was with tangled with the foxy pirates. They should be easy enough to find at least, Hack said, leaning over to look at the map. But, Sabo asked, keeping his eyes on his best friend. She winced slightly before putting down the next page of the report. Sabo glanced down at it before groaning and letting his head hit the table. Look at it this way, the Marines didn't report having caught him, Koala said with false cheer. I'm beginning to think Sabo might be cursed, Hack groaned. Koala shook her head. If anyone is cursed it would be the kid, and it can't be a curse or the Marines would have him impelled down by now. When I get my hands on that rubbery idiot I'm tying him to a tree. Just you wait, I'm going to do it, Sabo promised. It's kind of amazing he's so good at this without training, Hack said, once more trying to track where Luffy would have gone. Sabo wished him luck with that. Luffy didn't know how to navigate. He was just as likely to pick a direction as to stay in one place. The problem was unlike when they were kids there were a hell of a lot more places to hide. And worse, he was pretty sure Luffy wasn't even aware Sabo was looking for him. He told the others Luffy had been hit in the head and freaked out. That he has lashed out before taking off and that seeing Luffy scared like that is what triggered his memories. It was easier than the truth. That thing inside of Luffy was mad at Sabo. Either for not being dead, or for Luffy having thought he was dead. That part was a bit fuzzy. But it was mad at Sabo, and so Luffy's sense of adventure was being dialed up. Just like what used to happen when they were kids and Luffy got upset with Ace or Sabo for one reason or another. The red-eyed one would protect Luffy, somehow making him harder to find while the boy got it out of his system. They always found Luffy eventually, so there was that. And Red Eyes told him to come find Luffy, so he wasn't going to keep this up forever. Sabo had to believe that he'd reach Luffy eventually, if not soon, because honestly all the close calls his little brother had been having recently were giving him a damn ulcer. Him? That didn't sound like a good Hack. We don't need bad Koala snapped. Sabo sighed. No, let's hear it. So long as the Marines don't have Luffy it can't be much worse. Judging by these reports, it looks like Whitebeard is trying to locate your brother as well. Yeah, the gods hate me, Sabo half-sobbed to himself as he wondered how the hell Luffy got on Newgate's radar. And how he was going to tell Dragon for that matter. This had to be divine punishment for forgetting his brothers for so long. Grab him. Shee-hee-hee-hee-hee, you missed. A gunshot rang out, doing what all the shouting had not and getting Jinbei's attention. He frowned, worried about his crew. Though Jinbei had faith that his men wouldn't start something without reason, especially with a marine warship docked on the island. Before the Shichibukai could go investigate, a boy ran past, sandaled feet slapping hard against the ground as he laughed. A bevy of marines thundered after him as Jinbei looked on. The kid threw out an arm and used it to catapult himself down a different street out of sight. Luffy-kun, Jinbei shouted as he realized who just ran by. He'd naturally promised Oyaji that he'd keep an eye out for Ace-kun's little brother, but had never expected to find the boy. Especially not in the New World. There were so many islands in the Grand Line, and the chances of one of their allies finding him before the Marines caught up to the boy again had been slim, which was why most of those available had taken off for the Paradise side, to better their chances. Jinbei had no clue how the boy ended up in the New World, but it wasn't a good sign that the Marines already were on his tail. As he ran, Jinbei realized there was a slight problem with his plan of just grabbing the boy. Namely, he was a Shichibukai, and as such the Marines would expect him to hand over Luffy-kun if they saw him reaching the boy first. Something that he wouldn't do, of course. But that meant he had to get ahead enough that they wouldn't notice. Hearing the sounds of the chase turning slightly, Jinbei took a chance and cut down a different side road, nearly colliding with Aladdin. "Get the crew ready to leave immediately," Jinbei called out as he continued on his way, "and meet me at the docks." Aladdin had thankfully been with him long enough to not question it. Not to mention he probably figured it had something to do with the Marines running all over the town. In reality, Jinbei was impressed. He hadn't realized there had been quite so many Marines on this island. But Luffy-kun had a full company chasing him at this point. Yet somehow not a single one had managed to catch the boy. As Jinbei continued to try and cut ahead, he could see plenty of places where the Marines had attempted to lay ambush only to be overwhelmed by one small teen. Seeing Luffy-kun send another squad flying as he ran into them, Jinbei had to laugh. It reminded him a lot of Ace-kun, but with less third-degree burns. Especially when Luffy-kun skidded to a stop in front of a food stand. "Meat!" the boy cheered as he grabbed everything in reach and shoved it into his mouth. Taking advantage of Luffy-kun holding still for more than a moment, Jinbei grabbed his arm. "Come, Luffy-kun, we need to leave." Luffy met his eyes, cheeks full of food as he stared hard at Jinbei. "Who are you?" "A friend of Ace-kun's." "You know Ace? Great, is he here?" "He's with Oyaji." "Ace doesn't have a dad." Luffy him off, arms crossed. "Oyaji, Whitebeard." Jinbei tried only to be met by a blank stare. He tried again. "His captain?" "Ace has a captain?" Luffy asked, head tilted to the side. "He joined the Whitebeard pirates." The boy blinked, the sun catching his eyes and making the dark brown almost seem red as he asked, "Is he happy?" "Last time I spoke with Ace-kun he was worried about you," Jinbei replied honestly, "but yes, he's happy there." "Good." A shot rang out and Jinbei instinctively ducked. When he looked again, Luffy was gone and Marines had once again flooded the street. He let out a curse and headed in the direction with the most activity. He found the kid once, it shouldn't be too hard to track him down a second time. "Luffy," Ace groaned, yanking at his hair as Thatch walked up to him, shaking his head. "Sorry, Ace, no sign of him," his friend said. "I shouldn't be surprised." "Really, I shouldn't," Ace told Thatch. "But is it really so much to ask that he just stays on one island?" "Well, if he did that, the Marines would probably have caught him. So, at least they're as lost as is," his friend pointed out. Ace knew he was right. Almost every time Luffy was spotted, Marines were involved somehow. At first Ace had thought maybe they had Luffy and his brother kept escaping. Except there were times where they'd get an alert from an ally that Luffy had been spotted on an island with no Marines. But by the time someone got there, Luffy would be gone. No one was exactly sure how Luffy did it, and he was pretty sure if it wasn't his brother they were chasing, there would be a betting pool going. Who was Ace kidding? There definitely was a betting pool going. You'd think Whitebeard moving into Paradise would have made this easier, but somehow the sightings had gotten more rare the moment Moby rose from Fishman Island. Ace would honestly think Luffy was avoiding him, except he knew very well that the news of him joining Whitebeard hadn't been mentioned by the papers till he became the 2nd Division commander. Then there was the lag in the East Blue about things that happened in the New World meant Dayton hadn't known till he'd called. So there was no way Luffy knew. You told him then, Yoi? Marco asked, strolling over to where Ace was leaning against the rail questioning how this had happened. Don't tell me it's a complete dead end, Ace groaned. Usually they were able to figure out roughly who Luffy had interacted with before vanishing off the map at least. Sorry, Yoi, Marco shrugged when Ace glared at him before continuing, there is some news though you probably won't like it. Tell me, please. I'm going to get an ulcer at this rate. Dragon's people reached out to us, they want to team up, Yoi. Oh fuck no, Ace spat, fuck that. He's just going to put a bigger target on Luffy's back. Too late, Oyaji already said yes. Marco told him, crossing his arms. Haruta is talking to the Rev's dragon sent and already picked out the team going to the army. I know you have every reason to be mad at Dragon, but at this point I think we need all the help we can get. Your brother is slipperier than a hagfish, Thatch told him. Ace deflated a bit at that, knowing Oyaji had thrown everything he had at finding Luffy, and they were still left chasing leads that were at least days old. Help was needed, even if Ace was pissed about it. Macro crossed his arms. Are we sure Dragon didn't teach the kid how to be sneaky? Oh, I assure you, Luffy comes by being a little shit naturally, a voice answered from behind the 1st Division commander. Marco half-turned so Ace and Thatch could see the man being brought over by an exhausted Haruta. Vaguely Haruta waved a hand at the stranger. He was wearing all black, which was a choice in the heat of a summer island like Alabasta. Ace didn't think the frazzled look and frizzy hair was from the heat, though. Guys, this is Sabo, he's here to help. Maybe. Sabo, Ace spat. Ready to gut Dragon for playing games. Logically he knew people could share names, there were 10 guys named Chris on deck right now. But the fact Dragon would dare send someone with that name while Ace was already stressed about losing his brother was a line too far. Ace. What the hell? When did you join the Whitebeards? Wait, no, this makes sense. You're why Newgate is looking for a Luffy. Okay. That's alright then. Because, I gotta say, was not looking forward to trying to steal Luffy from Newgate if you guys found him first. Ace blinked dully as he tried to process that and really looked at the man. He took in the stupid hat with its goggles and a napkin around his throat. Taking a step forward he cold-cocked the bastard. Saw I thought you were dead? Sabo held up a finger like a shield as he rubbed his jaw. Now, in my defense, I had amnesia up till a little while ago. So, I didn't remember you to tell you I was still alive. That's a pretty convenient excuse, Yoi, Marco said, eyes narrowing dangerously, and even if it was true, you should have let your brothers know when you remembered. He wouldn't have known we thought he was dead, though, Ace pointed out. He still should have found you when he remembered. What if you thought he abandoned you? Thatch sniffed, and how long ago did you supposedly get your memories back? First, finding Ace was next on my list. I've been a little busy trying to find Luffy. Thatch conceded the point with a nod. Fair. Secondly, I got them back when Luffy punched the shit out of me. Wait, Ace frowned. You saw Luffy. Busted him free of the Marines at the start of this. And didn't become a barnacle? He asked, not surprised in the slightest. Sabo lost track of him if Luffy didn't want to go with him. You'd think. He told me I made Luffy cry, punched me, and said that I should hurry up and find him. Because if I didn't tell him to go back he wasn't breaking any rules. Ace nodded. Ah, red eyes. Huh? Sabo deflated that. He just poof, vanished, too. I thought he'd have grown out of it by now. Nah, if anything he's just gotten weirder, Ace said, throwing his arm across Sabo's shoulder. We'll deal with you not being dead and telling everyone back home after we find Luffy. I don't think they could handle the stress right now. He grinned as his brother sighed in obvious relief. Sabo knew very well Ace wasn't going to be the only one to deck him for this, even if Ace supposed it was a good excuse. His own feelings were all over the place, so it was probably better to just come back to the whole idea later. Preferably once they had Luffy tied to the damn mast so he couldn't wander off again. Hey, cabin boy. Swab the deck. Not a cabin boy, shee-hee-hee. Yeah well, unless you want us to toss your ass into the water. You gotta earn your keep, the man snapped back. Luffy cocked his head to the side and thought about that. He probably should, since he snuck onto the ship at the last island. but at the same time, I don't wanna." The man sighed, "And I don't want to throw you overboard. Look, clean the deck and I'll get the cook to make you a snack. How's that?" "Okay." Luffy cheered, running over to grab the mop and bucket from the man. He knew very well that he was pretty shit at cleaning, but for the promise of extra food he'd try. He had actually learned a thing or two about chores on ships thanks to sneaking on to a bunch of different ones. He mostly hid when on marine ships, though. Pirate ships weren't bad. He could usually fight to pay for his ride. The downside was pirate crews didn't feed him well. Except for that first crew. He hoped they got away from those marines okay. By far though, the best ship to sneak aboard were merchant ships. More than half the time the crews never even realized he was on board, or if they did, they thought he was supposed to be there. Sometimes, like this time, they actually paid attention to who was supposed to be there. Merchants usually took it well, often dropping him off at the next island when he said he was looking for his brother. A few crews slipped him some money, too. Especially if he did chores and didn't break anything. The best part though? Merchants went everywhere. Luffy had gotten to see so much, and because he was a passenger, it totally didn't count as setting sail. He did make sure when he reached an island to just ask around port for his brother, and if no one knew who he was talking about he quickly snuck aboard the ship that looked the most ready to leave. He had backtracked a few times because of that, but not since he'd run into that funny guy who said he knew Ace. Unfortunately, there had been too many Marines so Luffy couldn't stay and ask more questions. Not when the Marines were way stronger than before. It was good knowing Ace had a crew now. And he even knew the name of it, white-bread pirates. They were really hard to find, though. The island they were heading to was supposed to be super big, and had lots of pirates that visited. At least, that's what the guy in the kitchen said. So maybe he'd find someone who knew the white-bread pirates. Or at least some people to fight. And food. Luffy liked that the merchant ships fed him, but they still limited what he was allowed to eat. Even with stealing, he was so hungry. He didn't know he could be hungry like this all the time. It made something inside of him uneasy. Nodding to himself as he moved the water across the deck with the mop, Luffy decided he'd stay on the next island a little bit longer, even if Ace wasn't there. At least until his stomach wasn't so mad. Maybe look for the ship with the most supplies before hiding on board. "Alright. Let's make this fast," Thatch reminded his men as they worked as a team to secure the boat. "I don't see what the hurry is. There hasn't been a sighting of the kid in days," Sal said good-naturedly. Thatch clasped a hand dramatically to his chest. "Don't jinx it." "Yeah," Paul laughed, saying something like that is just asking her there to be a sighting back in paradise while we're gone. "You know Commander Ace would totally convince Oyaji to head back over that way again and leave us stranded here." Sal held up his hands in defeat, nodding slightly. "Alright, my bad. It is pretty wild Jinbei saw him on this side of the Grand Line, though." "Well, according to the revs and the marine activity, he's definitely on this side," Paul shot back. "I wasn't doubting Jinbei. If he says he saw the brat he saw the brat. I'm just saying it's weird is all. How the hell did he even cross the red line, huh?" Thatch clapped his hands. "You can ask him when we find him. For now, you guys get the supplies we ordered." "Sure. No problem." "Good, and while you do that, I'm going to see if I can find that crew that's been buzzing around our islands like a pesky fly," Thatch told them, grinning sharply as he turned his attention to the town proper. This island wasn't one of theirs, but it was at the edge of their usual territory with a nice temperate climate. The town used all that to their advantage and had become quite the little trade hub as Marines often hesitated to set up a base too close to an area a Yonko was known to frequent. They might spout out about justice at the drop of a hat, but even they knew that would be throwing lives away. Towns like this capitalized on that though. They became safe havens for smaller crews and merchants looking to do some illicit deals. Every now and then the Whitebeards would get word of one of these crews or merchant groups getting just a little bit too full of themselves. When that happened, retaliation was swift. While this island might not technically be part of their territory, the islands that were under their protection benefited greatly from the trade provided by places like this. That would be why Oyaji had sent them on a quick supply run. Word had reached them that a rather unsavory group of pirates had been hitting a few of their allied merchants. That was not going to stand with Oyaji. While the entire crew was pretty invested in finding Luffy, this was a good opportunity for Thatch to blow off some steam. When he had heard that the merchants had spotted the Jolly Roger of the pesky crew giving their territory a hard time at this island, he volunteered to deal with it. Honestly, at this point, anything to get away from Ace and his apparent long-lost brother Sabo. Don't get them wrong, he was thrilled for his best friend. And Sabo seemed like a fantastic guy. Well, he seemed like a fantastic guy when he wasn't being creepy about all the shit that he had no right knowing. The two of them, however, had been wearing themselves thin with worry, and it was stressing him out just to watch them. Honestly, Thatch had no clue how Marco dealt with it. He thought it might have something to do with the Phoenix's healing abilities, because this whole situation was one mind-numbing headache for Thatch, and he wasn't even one of the commanders in charge of tracking down the little brat. Naruto was put on bed rest 2 days ago, having worked themselves to the point of passing out in the communications room. The point was, all of his good friends were really stressed out and absolutely stressing him out just by being around them. Unlike Ace and Sabo though, Thatch had complete confidence in their ability to get to Luffy before something terrible happened. Marco would just rolled his eyes when Thatch said that though. The worrywart had pointed out that as the older brothers, Ace and Sabo had a better idea of how Luffy worked. He had said if they were worried, it was probably with good reason. Thatch refused to admit that Marco was probably right. One of them had to be optimistic about all of this damage. So in order to offer his friends the undying optimism that they so desperately needed, he had decided to go beat the crap out of another pirate crew. Self-care was very important when it came to taking care of others. And his form of self-care was working out his frustrations in forms of extreme aggression. There was a very good reason that the Marines tended to avoid Thatch in particular when the man wasn't on the Moby. It was a well-known fact that if he was not on the ship, he was looking for trouble. It didn't matter how easygoing he was. There was a reason Thatch was the 4th Division commander. When he set out to deal with a problem, Oyaji considered the issue done before Thatch even left the ship. He wouldn't even feel badly about taking out this particular crew. Not with the way the various villagers and shopkeepers kept side-eyeing him. There was an air of unease that had him grinding his teeth slightly. Catching the eye of one particular shopkeeper, Thatch smiled disarmingly. "Hi. I was wondering if you could help me." "You're a Whitebeard, right?" "Yep." The woman gave a sharp nod. "They're staying at the Drowned Rat." He loved it when people wanted to be helped. Or well, at least were smart enough to not make this hard. His smile shifted into something more predatory. "And are they there now?" "Should be. Most of them at least. Their bastard of a captain has been slinking around like a dog, though." The woman curled her lip. "He's been eyeing up the young ones." "I see," and Thatch did. The Whitebeards might be pirates, but in their eyes kids were off limits. Too many of them had suffered at the hands of people who saw youngsters as easy victims. If he hadn't already been planning on annihilating the small crew, he definitely was going to now. "Can you get word to your mayor to meet me at the docks in a few hours?" "I can. But I can also tell you now we're all more than willing to pay," she said, knowing full well that as an independent island they'd have to reimburse Oyaji for the protection. "I'm not worried about that," Thatch assured her. "I'm just on a bit of a tight schedule. So if he could bring the payment to the docks, that would be great. I'll meet him there after I take care of your infestation." She dropped in relief. "Yes, I'll tell him. And thank you. I know you don't have to, us not being under your flag and all. But it means a lot." "Don't worry about it. We appreciate having such a friendly trading hub so close to our borders after all," he told her honestly with a wave before looking towards where the tavern was. As he headed towards his prey, Thatch mentally reminded himself to not get his hopes up for a good fight. Bastards like this crew rarely offered any real challenges. Still, a light workout would do wonders for his mood. And if he was lucky, they would have a decent-sized war chest to raid. "So you still haven't found the anchor?" Shanks asked over the denden in lieu of a hello. "What gave it away, brat? Might be the fact I've had a few of your guys sneaking into my territories to look." Shanks sounded amused before asking. "He's not actually in the New World, is he?" Jinbei ran into him. "Almost literally, from the sound of it," Newgate admitted readily enough. "There's been a few other sightings as well." "Damn, first thought those marine bastards were just trying to throw you off the trail. It would probably be easier to track him if that was the case." There was a fond chuckle. "You know they're calling him a ghost?" "Cryptid, Captain. Stop listening to my calls, Yasop." "Garahaha. Sounds lively there." Whitebeard laughed. "Cryptid, Naruto will like that." The truth is he's been like this since he was a kid. Makino still calls every now and then to tell me what sort of crazy shit he gets into. Sometimes I wish he wasn't so damn unpredictable, Shanks sighed. He'd still be with the Marines if that was the case. Oh, I know. Though I feel like I'm going to go as gray as you at this rate, the other Yonko laughed. Whitebeard wasn't surprised at that. He still swore to this day he'd gone bald from the worry his sons and daughters gave him. He remembered the first time Shanks had told him about the little boy he'd met in Goa. How surprised that Shanks had even gone to the island at first, though less surprised after hearing about the lass he'd met there. Though he'd never been surprised at how quickly he'd grown fond of the little boy left in the lass's care. Shanks was a good father. It was only natural he'd see a lonely boy and take him in. More than once he'd received a call from the younger man asking for advice on how to deal with an unruly boy. Newgate had laughed uproariously at that. He remembered quite well when Shanks and Buggy were running underfoot on Roger's ship, and he was sure to remind the younger man. He could acknowledge though that Shanks was a very proficient young father. Even if his previous experience had only been with his daughter. A daughter he had to give up for her own protection. And as for the son of his soul, he'd been forced to leave him behind too. Whitebeard had yet to meet the boy, but going off the stories from Shanks and from Ace, he was looking forward to when he did. He couldn't imagine how hard it would have to be for Shanks, waiting to hear anything. He knew very well the man wanted to go off and look for himself. But it was easy to tell that the Marines were aware that Garp had contacted him. They've been dogging the man's steps ever since. It wasn't worth the risk. "How's Ace handling it?" Shanks asked, pulling him from his musings. "He's stressed, though pleased to reconnect with his other brother. I can't believe the kid survived that," Shanks admitted, and Whitebeard nodded in full agreement. "Once this is over, I hope I can meet him." Newgate grinned wickedly at that. "I think that can be arranged." "No," Shanks laughed, "you're stealing him, aren't you?" "I'd take all three if I could," he admitted. "Let's see if you're still saying that after meeting Anchor and having him on your ship," Shanks told him, amused. "Afraid I'll steal him from you." "You can't steal what doesn't belong to me," the other man told him seriously. "I love the kid, but, bah, you'll see what I mean when you meet him." "Oh?" Newgate asked, interest piqued. "Nope, you'll just have to meet him. You wouldn't believe me if I just told you." "I see." He wondered if it had anything to do with some of the stories Ace would tell. It would be interesting to see. "Oops, Marine ship coming. They'll be in range for spying soon. I'll contact you again when I get the chance. Until then, thanks." "Garahaha, no need to thank me, Brad. I'm doing this because I want to." As the Dendon went back to sleep, Whitebeard looked across his crew pensively. He'd have thought Shanks would have been more upset by the insinuation that he was planning on claiming Luffy as one of his own. Dragon had been highly offended by the idea, though the man had no say in Newgate's eyes. Oh, he understood why the man had kept his distance. He could even perhaps understand giving his child to Garp to raise. Except Dragon had other options. Less obvious options that could have kept the boy hidden. Garp meant well, but the man was incapable of seeing the harm Marines as a whole caused. Though after seeing how Sabo and Koala turned out, raised by the Revolutionary Army, Garp was definitely the better bet. Which is why he was adopting those two brats, and their friend, of course, wouldn't want him to feel left out. Of course, if Ace and Sabo were his sons, Luffy would be, too. The Seas knew someone should look out for the boy, and he had plenty of experience with unruly sons. Whitebeard nodded to himself, pleased with the plan for his growing family. He would see what Shanks meant when he met the boy, but no matter what, Luffy was going to be his son. There was no rule saying a pirate only has to have one father, and with three powerful fathers the Marines would think twice before going after the boy again. Nika chuckled as they watched all the people go about their business from his spot on the roof. This town was so much more lively than Fuchsia, but still had that warm feeling of happy people. Well, mostly happy people. There was a group of pirates that had docked the other day he wanted nowhere near Luffy. They felt dirty, not free at all. The worst type of people. The type Nika remembered from the many people who tried to eat them. They knew Luffy could handle himself, and honestly Nika had no problem letting Luffy do just that. But Luffy hadn't seen the way the captain of that crew had looked at the slip of a boy walking down the streets earlier that day. Nika had noticed. So they might have encouraged Luffy to take a bit of a nap. Honestly, that hadn't been very hard. Even staying in this town for a few days hadn't done anything to give his human the food they needed. Nika wasn't sure if the feeling they were having was worried. They'd never experienced worry for their human before. But feeling the lethargy coming from the bright energetic boy had them feeling a certain way. It made them want to both rush to where Luffy's brothers were and also bundle him up in blankets and let nobody near. It had been frighteningly easy to give Luffy that nudge. To let their boy drift off into a dreamless sleep while Nika kept watch. I guess we should move on soon, Luffy, they said to themselves. Nika laid back and watched the clouds pass. Maybe we could stay longer, but people recognize you now. It'll make dining and dashing a lot harder. Not to mention that pirate crew Nika didn't like. The god frowned at the thought, itching at the idea of Luffy near people like that. It wasn't a very funny thought. Then Nika laughed, you'll be so surprised to wake up on a new ship. I bet, I can't wait to see your reaction, they're always the best. With that decided, Nika flipped to their feet, bouncing from building to building until they reached the docks. They wanted a ship that looked ready to leave soon, but one that wasn't too big. The long stretches at sea were a lot of fun, but it meant less food for Luffy. Spotting a decent-sized vessel, Nika watched as some men rolled barrels on board. Their excitement told Nika it was probably rum. Not their favorite, but if they were loading rum and not water, they weren't going to be at sea long. They thought there was another island a few days away. The funny old man who'd scolded Luffy yesterday had said something about it. And maybe something about pirates. Luffy hadn't been paying attention, so Nika hadn't either, too invested in laughing at the man's impotent rage. This one will do, Nika grinned, slipping over to one of the crates waiting to be loaded. They pulled the top free and were pleased to see it was stuffed with soft-looking fabric. It would be hilarious to see how Luffy would react to be wrapped up in all of it. Nika doubted he'd think he was buried alive. More likely for his human to think they were turning into a butterfly or something. Just the thought of it had them snickering as they pulled the lid down right above them, fingers slipping through the crack right before the crate was lifted. With the next part of their journey underway, Nika settled back, slipping into a semi-wakeful state. They'd had a lot of practice recently with this. Nika felt it was better than how they used to return the body to Luffy's control. Before this trip, it was jarring. There was always a moment of two where Luffy was completely vulnerable. Neither of them aware. It hadn't been a problem before. It had been so close to their shared dreams but different enough to be exciting. The twinge of uncertainty on what would happen. After being hunted though, Nika didn't like that. It was not safe when the Marines could be just around the corner. A moment of inattentiveness could cost Luffy his freedom. He couldn't lose his freedom. Not now and hopefully not ever. Nika didn't want to see what it would do to them, worried for Luffy. They knew now that the chains Luffy willingly tied himself with were no threat to their freedom. Those ties didn't bind them, they just made the freedom taste better, made it more fun. The chains the Marines wanted to wrap his human in would suffocate his boy. Luffy would never be able to fulfill the promise and Nika's powers would never have a chance to really run wild. If that happened, Nika swore they'd never partner with another human. They couldn't hate humans, they were too funny, and having seen them through Luffy's eyes they'd always be hilarious to Nika. But if they took Luffy from the sun god, well, it was hard to laugh when surrounded by broken dreams. So Nika had worked hard to make it so they wouldn't be taken by surprise. They pushed themselves from the drifting state they'd watched the world from to be more aware. Suggesting things in almost whispers. Laughing and having fun with Luffy in a way that had seemed so out of reach. Luffy had grown in the short journey, too. The constant pressure pushing the boy. He used his abilities a bit smoother, the world just slightly tilted towards his wants. Luffy trusted his rubber body more, allowing the power to move as it would to protect him. Nika was proud and humbled. The grumpy funny boy that had eaten them by accident understood them better than any human before. Smiling to themselves as they felt Luffy's dreams drift into the absurd, Nika settled into wait. They were safe and Luffy was happy. That was all that matters. Though, Nika supposed they should probably try a little harder to find Ace. Or maybe Sabo, one of them at least. Because Luffy might be having fun, but he was definitely feeling a little lonely and Nika hated that. Welcome back, Yoi. Thanks, Marco, Thatch grinned, accepting the hand up. Any word? His grin became a little strained as Marco shook his head, trail went cold. I'm sure it's fine. It's gone cold before. That's what Oyaji keeps telling Ace and Sabo, Yoi. The 1st Division commander raised their voice a bit as the men in question walked over. Enough about that, Yoi. How was the trip? Thatch rolled with it, understanding now was not the time to dwell on what they couldn't change. Picking up the small chest that had already been moved as his men worked on unloading the mini-mobi, he swaggered over to the others. Did you miss me? You were gone. I hadn't noticed, Sabo grinned, accepting the high five from Haruta. Yeah, very funny. Guess you don't want to see what I got, then? He asked, fingers tapping at the small chest. Shame. And after I had such a mighty battle, too. Shut up, Thatch, you probably barely even got a workout, Haruta joked, but they were looking him over with a critical eye. It made him feel warm seeing his family cared so much. The fact that Haruta knew without a doubt Thatch could handle himself in a fight yet cared enough to make sure he wasn't hurt. Catching the smaller commander's eyes, he shook his head. He let out a chuckle. They were barely worth my time, honestly. If they hadn't started in the New World, they'd never have made it. As it was, the captain was the only moderate threat and he folded like a wet napkin. Still, glad I took care of it. Bastard was the worst sort. It's always disappointing when crews form on this side of the Grand Line are mediocre at best. Haruta shook his head as the others nodded along. Then they made grabby hands. Now show me what you got. Relax, you treasure-hungry gremlin, I'm getting to it, he laughed. Placing the chest on a barrel, he turned his back to his friends and the rest of the crew that had gathered and opened it. He lifted the fruit within, careful around the points. It didn't hurt as much as made it annoying to hold, much like an artichoke. There was a reason he'd carried it on board in a chest. Once he was sure he had a firm grip on the purple fruit, he held it up. Is that a devil fruit? Someone asked. Thatch wasn't sure who. It's a purple fruit, of course it is, you idiot. I've never seen one before, jerk. That's a shitty excuse. Yes, he said, cutting through the noise, it's a devil fruit. No, I don't know which it is. You gonna eat it? Ace asked. If you do, it tastes like shit. I'm not eating it until I know what the hell it is, he laughed. Fair point. What if it's a stupid power, like rubber? Sabo smirked, dodging the smack Ace aimed at the back of his head. I don't know, I've heard of that guy, and he's giving the Marines the real runaround. Marco laughed. Too, yoi. Still, I'd rather know which fruit it is before I decide, Thatch told them. I think we have a book somewhere on different fruits. I'll see if I can dig it out, Ace offered brightly. Thatch nodded in agreement. I'd appreciate that, if you could. But no rush. I get it, you want to wait till we find Luffy first. I can always decide what to do with it later, it's not going anywhere. Just make sure you lock it up, yoi. Don't want someone accidentally eating it, Marco joked, earning some good-natured booze from those one deck. Not to worry, I'll go put it away, Thatch said, only to be cut off with a yawn. Ace shook his head slightly. Maybe take a nap. Your division has dinner under control and you look exhausted. Didn't sleep well last night, he admitted, kept hearing weird things. He turned his attention to those unloading the smaller ship. Someone put Stefan on board for a bit. If we picked up vermin, I don't want them getting into the Moby. Will do, they agreed, most of them also a bit more tired than a trip like that warranted. They'd spent most of the trip back looking for whatever it was making sounds. At first Thatch had thought it was a stowaway. Uncommon but not unheard of for people to want to take their chances with Oyaji's mercy. They hadn't sensed anyone getting on the ship though, and someone had been with it at all times anyway. So, Thatch was willing to bet rats. Maybe a cat or two. If it was a cat, that was fine. A ship Moby's size always needed more vermin killers. But rats were a hard-nosed. Stefan would sniff out whatever it was though. He was a good dog for that. Especially considering he was a warhound and not really bred for ratting. Yawning again, Thatch headed towards his cabin. He'd lock up the fruit and take a nap. Oyaji would understand why his report was going to be a little late. Thatch woke suddenly, sitting up in his bed disoriented at first. It took him a moment to figure out what woke him. After a glance at the porthole to gauge the time, he concluded it was well after dinner, probably close to midnight. Meaning his chef's senses probably woke him up because this was about the time Ace would sneak into the kitchen to grab a snack. Shaking his head at the predictably of his brother, he got up and slipped on his shirt, not bothering with a light. He had to go find his shoes, though. He probably kicked them off when he'd come to bed like normal. After a brief search he found the first one under his bed, the second by the door next to a note. Picking it up, Thatch was surprised to see it was a note from Teach. "I think I know what fruit you found. Meet me in the kitchen with it at 1 so I can confirm it." Teach, "Well, that's nice of him," Thatch grinned, grabbing the little chest with fruit from the bottom drawer of his desk. It made sense to Thatch that the other man wouldn't have wanted to draw attention to the possibility in case he was wrong. There were a lot of people on board who would never let him live down a wrong guess, after all. So Teach wanting to meet in private made sense. And since he was one of the few Ds on ship, it wouldn't surprise anyone to see the man coming to the kitchens late. So, first Thatch would chase Ace and probably Sabo out of the pantry, give them a late-night snack that was more of a meal for 5 and throw on a pie for Teach. Then, after he'd talked to the other man about the fruit, he'd prepare breakfast before checking to see if Oyaji was up for his report. Humming to himself, Thatch made his way to the kitchen, feeling warm and fuzzy thinking about how awesome his family was and how loved he felt. Luffy snickered as he snuck past another person. He'd been really surprised with the ship he'd woken up on ended up tied to another ship instead of an island. He wasn't even sure that was a thing that could happen, so of course he just had to explore the new ship. There were so many people it was like being in Hightown. Except, everyone seemed a lot nicer than those bastards. They had a big dog, too. He was such a big fluffy good boy, and Luffy had had so much fun hiding in his fur to sneak aboard the bigger ship. Doggy didn't mind, either, dropping Luffy off in an empty hallway before giving him a big lick. Luffy loved making new friends like that. He was getting a bit hungry, though. Luffy had stayed out of sight when he'd heard most of the people on board head towards where the delicious smells were coming from, knowing showing up when people are eating was never a good idea. Instead, he'd taken the opportunity to explore all over the ship. He was pretty sure it was a pirate ship. There were way too many bunk rooms for a merchant ship and it was too disorganized for a marine ship. Coming to that conclusion, Luffy decided he'd sneak into the kitchen really late and grab some food. If they caught him, he'd deal with it then. But Luffy wasn't too worried. Almost everyone felt really nice, and kitchen people tended to be the nicest of all on ships. Except, when he reached the door to the kitchen there were 2 people in the kitchen, and one of them didn't feel very nice. Something inside of Luffy instantly was on edge, more so when he saw the weird purple fruit sitting on the table. When he saw the bad-feeling man pull out a dagger he didn't hesitate, fist lashing out to slam into the man's skull with more force than he'd usually use. It caused the man to drop the dagger, but it didn't send him flying like Luffy had hoped. Instead the man turned and glared at him. "What the hell was that for, you little shit?" "You shouldn't stab people when they're not looking," he replied, "it's rude." When the bad-feeling man took a step towards him Luffy didn't back down, that feeling inside him growing. There was a fresh pie on the table next to the weird fruit and the other man looked confused and a bit upset. It made Luffy really angry. It was wrong to attack people who were feeding you. "Then I'll just get rid of you first, I guess. You can try," he snapped back, warmth flooding his limbs. "Teach, were you really going to stab me? Because you have my fruit? If you wanted it so bad, you just had to ask, we're Nakama." The man let out a sound that was a mockery of a laugh. "I never considered you Nakama. This whole crew is nothing but a joke. I've only been using you to get the yummy no am I." "Better a joke than an idiot with bad taste," Luffy spat. "That fruit is bad. If you want it, you're bad, too." "What was that brat?" Teach lunged, thick hand closing around Luffy's throat and squeezing. Luffy just glared at him, ignoring as the other man tried to pull him off only to be battered away. Teach squeezed harder, using both hands as he tried to kill Luffy. It made him want to laugh, thinking he could be killed by something as stupid as strangling. So he did. Teeth bared in more of a threat than a grin he laughed at the man. "Sheehehe, you'll have to try harder than that." "Oh, really?" There was a glint in his eye as he slammed Luffy into the doorframe. One of his hands was coated in black somehow before he hit Luffy hard. Harder than Gigi ever had hit. It made him feel sick and dizzy before that feeling inside burned to the surface. "Sheehehe, you shouldn't have done that, sheehehe," his voice laughed, burning his throat like hot soup. Getting slammed back into the wall was worth it, even if it hurt. So he laughed, loud and free right up to when he was thrown at the other man and hit his head on the corner of the table. "Kid, stay down, I'll deal with this," the nice guy with the funny hair said. Nika slapped his hand away, getting to their feet. Nika only had eyes for the asshole who had dared to try and kill their human. Shihihi. You really shouldn't have done that, smelly man. The man had used that weird technique that let people actually hurt Luffy, which was fine. Luffy got stronger the more he fought strong people. Even trying to kill Luffy could be forgiven to an extent, because Luffy himself wasn't bothered by it most times. But wanting that fruit and hurting Luffy enough that Nika was able to grab control was not acceptable. First thing first, Nika was going to get rid of that fruit. Normally they didn't care what the others did. Nika had barely cared about the world as a whole before Luffy. The other fruits could fight and squabble, taking the side of their people as much as they liked. That was their freedom, after all. And if they didn't like the human, they could always not cooperate, or kill them if needed. It wasn't Nika's place to take away their fun. This fruit though, it was selfish and hateful. A feeling of despair leaked from the fruit, and Nika realized that was what they'd been feeling on the island. They wanted this fruit nowhere near their Luffy even if no one had eaten it yet. If someone did eat it, like the fat bastard trying to hit them as they swayed out of range, it would be a threat that Luffy wasn't ready for. Hold still so I can stab you, you little shit, the teach said, though it was unclear if he meant Nika or the nice guy who was keeping him back with a blackened kitchen knife. Nope, Nika laughed, bouncing over to the table with the fruit. They picked it up and looked for where they could put it. There wasn't a window and punching it through the wall didn't seem like a good idea on a ship. But there was an oven. Nika grinned widely, laughing even as they yelped, rolling away from the knife aimed at Luffy's head. They let the momentum to bounce them off the table up into the air and landed splat against the oven. With their back to the fight they quickly opened it and shoved the fruit inside, spinning the dial for heat as high as it would go. They ducked, covering their ears. Shihihi, fire in the hole. Wah! You lit! A loud bang cut both men off, black smoke billowing from the oven as the door fell off. Nika laughed at the look on their faces, feeling Luffy start to stir thanks to the sound. They knew it wouldn't really get rid of the fruit. That was impossible. But Nika might have blown themselves up a time or two. Enough to know the fruit would reform far, far away. Maybe next time it felt Luffy and Nika, it would vanish on its own. Either way, it wasn't a problem anymore. You, Teach lunged at them. Nika yelped, scrambling away. It was getting harder though. Luffy's heart beat erratically and his limbs were smoking. Nika was running out of time unless they were willing to hurt Luffy. Their brave human couldn't quite handle the raw power very long yet. It looked like they didn't need to worry though. A glance showed Luffy's favorite people standing in the door, Ace. Sabo, I'm leaving Luffy to you. Shihihi. He closed their eyes, letting go and letting the exhaustion pull them under. Luffy trusted Ace and Sabo to always protect him, so Nika trusted them too. Plus, the look of panic on their faces when Luffy collapsed was always fun. Luffy? Ace shouted in stereo with his brother. Somehow he knew he shouldn't be surprised. And any surprise was buried under the rage he felt towards the one standing over his brother anyway. Flames licked the wooden ceiling and floor as he rushed Teach. Get away from my brother. It's not what it looks like, Commander. Teach got out as he was driven back, unfortunately closer to Luffy. He destroyed the fruit Commander Thatch was giving me. And why is Thatch out cold then? Sabo asked darkly, checking on the other man. The kid doesn't attack people unprovoked. Ace cut him off, stepping closer. He knew Marco would be there soon. He was just biding time, keeping the attention on him and not his vulnerable little brother. Teach saw through it though, pressing a foot against his brother's chest. If it wasn't for this shit I'd have had my fruit and been long gone before any of you fools thought to check on the idiot. So you were planning to kill your nakama for a devil fruit then? Thatch is coming around. Ace, Sabo cut in. Ace didn't want to believe it, even with the confession. But there was Luffy. Luffy who was always content to let things play out with a smile. Ignoring how the hell his brother was on board let alone in the room at the time, it was all the proof Ace needed. If Luffy got involved he saw something that set him off. Which meant Teach likely attacked Thatch with no warning. Last chance, get away from my brother and face Oyaji, or burn where you stand, traitor. You wouldn't dare risk your darling little brother, would you, Commander? Teach leered at him. He was right, of course, he'd never risk his brother's safety. Ace grinned at him, a feral look. My flames only burn what I want them to, asshole. He saw the flash of fear as the bastard realized he was completely serious. Ace might have been newer to his devil fruit, still far from awakening it, but he understood the logia. Fire wasn't just burning in anger. It was a glow in protection. It could be a violent torrent of heat and pain, or it could be warmth and comfort. It was a delicate balance, made harder by Ace's natural aggressiveness. He'd learned long ago how to temper that aggression into a protective fury running wild with Luffy though. Luffy was his to protect, and he felt the fire simmering under his skin, promising pain to whoever hurt what was theirs and grinned as he let go, letting loose the heat and destruction. He felt more than saw as the flames caught on Teach's clothes, as they bit into his flesh. The man shrieked in pain, stumbling away from Luffy and into the wall. A wall that gave way under one hockey-imbued fist. Teach took off into the hall, flames curling around him. Ace, Sabo spoke, a warning and a promise of support. With a sigh he pulled the flames back. Sabo was right. Letting his flames rage where he couldn't see them was risky. Even if he wanted to burn the traitor. He took a deep breath and banked the feeling, promising next time, to the fire that whispered in his mind. Yeah, Bo, I know. What the hell, yoi? Marco gaped, standing in the doorway. Turning to look, Ace could see the other commanders huddled close, just unwilling to bear the probably oppressive heat the kitchen was radiating. Teach is a traitor, Sabo told him. I think he attacked Thatch, and Luffy stopped him. Your brother Luffy is apparently on the ship, Ace answered, sitting Luffy up and lightly slapping his cheek. Thatch let out a groan, sitting up so fast he almost brained Sabo. Teach gone. He must have planned this. There was a boat waiting for him. Izo sniffed from the doorway. The crew wisely stayed out of his way when he fled. If Ace's fire didn't kill him, he was stronger than he pretended. Did he really attack you, yoi? Marco asked, offering Thatch a hand up. He did. Was going to stab me in the back over the stupid devil fruit. The bastard. Thatch nodded to Ace and Luffy, who was snoring slightly. The kid came out of nowhere and decked him one. I thought Teach was going to murder him, but Luffy is a bit hard to kill, Sabo shrugged. He was laughing at the attempt. Then he hit his head and shit got weird. He pointed at a blackened oven. He destroyed the devil fruit and blew up part of my kitchen to do it. Impossible, yoi. Ace frowned at that. Devil fruits were supposed to be indestructible. He had a feeling though if there was a way to destroy one, Luffy would figure it out. Especially if, were his eyes red? Yeah, I think they were. Then the fruit is gone, Sabo sighed. If Red Eyes wanted it gone, it was probably really dangerous to Luffy. It'll probably reform somewhere far away. Red Eyes? Ace ignored the question, smiling softly as Luffy yawned before blinking slowly. His nose twitched and Ace let the enthusiastic fist just go right through him as his brother shouted, meat. I'm sure Thatch will be more than happy to give you some as a thank you, Luffy. Thatch? Luffy cocked his head to the side before a smile overtook his face and Ace suddenly had an arm full of younger brother. Ace. I found you. I've been looking everywhere for you. And we've been looking everywhere for you, you little idiot, he grinned, hugging Luffy close. Sheehehe, sorry. He wasn't sorry at all. That was alright though. Ace had a surprise for him. Luffy, look who's here, he said, turning his brother's head so he was looking right at Sabo. Sabo barely had a moment to raise a hand in greeting before Luffy had flung himself at their long-lost brother, sobbing excitedly. I knew it, sheehehe. I missed you so much, Sabo. Ace just laughed. He was sure everyone would have questions later. Hell, he had questions right now, but everything else could wait while his brothers reunited. So, let me get this straight, yoi. You woke up in a crate full of fabric. Yep. Luffy nodded at him enthusiastically while he kept eating. Managed to stay hidden from 4 experienced pirates. Apparently sheehehe. Snuck onto this ship, the big doggy gave me a ride, came the interjection, so at least the how was answered if not the why. Hid until you got hungry, well hungrier. But I wanted to save all the yelling for after I ate. Saw Teach go to attack Thatch and got involved, yoi. Why? Because Luffy had obviously been able to tell both men were much stronger than he was. He'd admitted as much to his brothers, saying how he was actually surprised his punch got Teach's attention. Luffy didn't bother looking at him and just shrugged, I wanted to. That, according to both Ace and Sabo, was basically Luffy's entire motivation for everything. He did what he wanted, and if he didn't want to, you couldn't make him. Marco was both stressed by this and thankful. Thankful because Luffy had definitely saved Thatch's life. Stressed because no one was sure how to convince the brat to stay with them now that found him. Given he'd snuck on without any of the crew noticing, Marco wasn't going to pretend they'd notice right away if he left. That wasn't his problem though, thank the seas. He was just to keep Luffy busy while Thatch, Ace, and Sabo explained the situation to Oyaji. Speaking of, how do you manage to blow up the devil fruit in an oven anyway? Dark brown eyes blinked at him. Don't know. Don't remember it, shehehe. Oh boy, that was worrisome. Marco rubbed his forehead. You're a paramecia, right? Shehehe, yep. The boy pulled his lip to the side well past all reasonable limits before letting it go. I ate the gum no am I. I'm a rubber man. Shehehe. It tasted like shit, though. Sabo said it was so people wouldn't get greedy and try to eat more than one. That's one theory, yoi, Marco allowed, not giving voice to his own theory. That the fruit tasted bad as a way to judge their user. In his experience, people who ate the whole fruit were more likely to gain control quicker. Which made no sense when just one bite would grant the power. The sun says it's because it's funny, though, Luffy commented with a shrug. Marco felt his lip curl slightly at the memory. I didn't think it was very funny, yoi. You ate a fruit? Which one? Did you know Ace ate one? He didn't have one before. He said he'd tell me about it later, but he had that funny face he gets when he thinks the story is stupid. Do you know how he got one? Marco had to chuckle at that. I ate the Toritori no Mi model. Phoenix, I'm a mythical zone type. A mystery chicken. Got it. Something like that, yoi, he allowed, a little thrown off that the Phoenix wasn't throwing a fit over being called a chicken. Instead, he was getting a feeling of exasperation, but not the fond type his many ship brothers' teasing caused. He frowned slightly at that but moved on. I know Ace ate one. It's called the Maramara no Mi. A logia type. I don't know the story behind it, yoi, he lied. Ace would probably try and kill him for making him look uncool in front of Luffy. He'd barely forgiven Haruta for telling Sabo, and that was only because he said Sabo never thought he was cool to begin with. Boo, lame, Luffy said with a grin. His smile stretched a bit wider, got a little more manic as he leaned forward into Marco's space. Trying to make space between them, Marco felt a warning trill from the Phoenix and stilled. He looked closer at Luffy to try and figure out what was drawing the attention of the fruit, surprised to notice the red tint to his eyes that hadn't been there a second before. He'd heard Luffy's eyes sometimes looked red, even Thatch claimed to have seen it in that short time they'd interacted. Marco had brushed it off though, as lighting combining with the haki the boy obviously possessed. Something that could quite easily be mistaken for a sudden change in personality, especially since Luffy was young and untrained. This wasn't haki he was feeling, though. Haki didn't have the Phoenix screaming predator at him. Even the most aggressive conquer haki didn't get that reaction. No, his instincts said he was looking at the other Ace and Sabo had hinted at, the impossibility. Because it was definitely the devil fruit. Aware and watching Marco with glee even while Luffy seemed to be in control. That was what had the Phoenix uneasy. A zone type close to awakened, if not there already. An impossibility, because every person who ate their fruit knew exactly what it was after that first bite. And Luffy, Marco knew, couldn't lie. I thought you said your fruit was paramecia? Shehehe, that's what people tell me, Luffy chirped. And the fruit? She. I never asked, because it's more fun this way figuring it out myself, don't you think? No, Marco did not agree with that. If Luffy wasn't a paramecia but a zone and was still rubbery, that meant he was probably a Hitohito no Mi model, like Sengoku's Golden Buddha. Marco swallowed thickly, wondering if maybe the Marines were after Luffy for reasons unrelated to his father. Especially if his fruit was this close to awakening at such a young age. Luffy was definitely a little menace, and as far as Marco could tell he wasn't even trying. If the Marines got him, he shook those thoughts from his head. That was a problem for Oyaji to worry over, and Marco might not even be right. Well, as long as you are having a good time, yoi. We are, the thing inside Luffy answered before the strange red tint faded. Marco had a feeling he might have just passed some sort of test as Luffy turned back to his food. He owed Ace an apology. Red Eyes was unnerving as hell. Sabo just buried his face in his hands. Don't get him wrong, he was so relieved to find Luffy. He just somehow forgot how much chaos always followed his little brother. Finding the one person who was a traitor on Whitebeard's crew. So typical of Luffy. As was picking a fight with him, though Sabo would blame that on Ace's influence to his dying day. I shouldn't be surprised, I really shouldn't. Look at it this way, if none of us could predict he'd end up on Whitebeard's ship, there's not a single Marine would, either. Koala tried, before grinning. Hack is having a hell of a time trying to explain this to Dragon, too. That and Newgate trying to adopt us, right? Oh, we thought we'd let you handle that, Mr. Chief of Staff, his friend teased. Sabo sighed deeply before nodding. He could understand why his friends and partners wouldn't want to tell their boss that they'd been adopted into the Whitebeards, especially since none of them were exactly opposed to it. I'm just going to wait a bit before dropping that one on him, Sabo told her. Newgate's probably going to adopt Luffy by this time the week is out anyway. Might as well tell him all at once. Dragon is a good man, but, Koala began, looking uneasy. He understood exactly what she wanted to say. The man was no father, even when he tried to be a father figure. He and Koala would know that better than most, having mostly grown up in the Revolutionary Army. The man cared deeply, but he just absolutely sucked at showing it. Now that Sabo remembered dealing with Garp, it actually made less sense. Garp wasn't a good guardian, but at least he wasn't emotionally constipated. Sabo'd feel guilty about the fact he and the others were going to agree except, well, Ace vouched that Newgate wouldn't take advantage of their positions in the Revolutionary Army, and Sabo believed him. I'm not even sure if Luffy knows Dragon is his father, honestly. I didn't know about it, at least, and Luffy's pretty shit about secrets. It would have come up, I think. So really, Dragon's done this to himself, Sabo told her as he stood. Going to go check on your little brother? More making sure he's still there, he laughed. Alright. Tell the kid hey for me. And Sabo. You still owe me an explanation about the whole red eye thing. I'm not even sure what it is, he hedged. Sabo had a damn good idea of what was going on. Especially given the chatter from some of the Marines. Sabo just didn't want to admit that his silly brother's fruit was somehow not the gum no mi. Something that should be impossible because upon eating, the fruits told their user which fruit it was. Ace confirmed it. He'd known instantly what he'd foolishly eaten before first catching fire. Yet Luffy always insisted his fruit was the gum no mi, a paramecia fruit. The only conclusion Sabo had was the fruit was somehow lying to his brother, or wasn't telling Luffy. But that left the mystery of what fruit it actually was. Since rubber wasn't an element, well, Sabo had his suspicions. Ace of course was trying to deny it, and Sabo couldn't blame him. If Sabo was right, there was a whole other reason the Marines would be after their brother. The only consolation was the fruit, whichever it was, obviously cared a great deal for Luffy. Red Eyes would probably do everything it could to protect Luffy. I think you have a good idea. When you need to talk about it, I'm here, and so is Hack. That's all I'm saying. Right. Okay. I promise I'll tell you soon, just, not yet. For now he just wanted to spend some time with his brothers and make sure Luffy was alright. He wasn't exactly skin and bones, but he'd lost a good amount of weight from when Sabo had seen him on the Marine ship. Nothing a lot of really good meals wouldn't fix, though. Meals that Thatch and the rest of the Whitebeard cooks seemed happy to dish out even if they did joke about their budget. Sabo understood, though. Luffy normally ate more than Ace, and right now he was eating what Ace and Sabo combined were eating as his body tried to catch up on lost calories. He'd slow down. Eventually. Maybe. Until then he and Ace were totally going to take advantage of the fancy desserts and meals Thatch kept giving Luffy as a thank you, and Sabo was late for the third lunch of the day. If he didn't hurry there wouldn't be any cake left. Rounding the corner to the mess hall he saw the usual crowd gathered around his brothers. Men and women he'd just met a few short months ago smiled and greeted him like old friends as they practically shoved him into the seat next to Ace. His brother gave him a half smile, most of his attention on Luffy. Then there was this guy, he was riding a bike, it was on the water, and when I asked the merchant guy, he said he was a super strong marine or something. So I didn't get to ask how he was riding a bike on the water. He was heading the other way, anyway. Hey, Ace, Sabo, do you think I could ride a bike on the water? No, sorry, Lou, Sabo told him, ignoring Ace's death grip on his thigh. Really, Ace should have expected stories like this from their little brother. Even if it did give Sabo a migraine even thinking of all the close calls they knew about, he'd accepted those probably weren't even the half of it. At least if Whitebeard convinced Luffy to be adopted, it would be his problem from now on. Because Dragon just didn't understand how impossible Luffy was to deal with, so asking him to look after their little brother was a complete lost cause. Ace made sure to hold tight to Luffy as he and Sabo brought their little brother to Oyaji. It didn't matter at all that Luffy seemed happy enough to be there. He was excited and hyper. If they looked away, he'd probably turn up in the West Blue next. Particularly since Ace was sure Red Eyes was annoyed that Teach got away. In which case, join the club. The whole crew was on the hunt for the rat bastard and Ace wanted him far away from Luffy or dead. Preferably dead, of course. Somehow he wasn't sure Red Eyes agreed though. It was a fight that Luffy just hadn't been strong enough to win. It had hurt his pride that he couldn't go after the bastard, but Oyaji was right. If Teach had been serious, even Ace and Sabo combined would have had a tough fight. Teach running when he did had been the best for everyone even if it grated on his pride. Teach, the man he'd thought was his friend. The only other D on the crew, who understood that itch to keep moving. The man who'd encourage him to take the commander position. A man he'd trusted with his life. Would have trusted with his brothers. A traitor. He couldn't even risk going after the bastard on his own. Sabo had threatened to keelhaul him if he ran off on his own. Sabo would, too, if he ditched Luffy like that. Of course, he would do the same to Sabo, so they were all going to stay put on the Mobi for now. Plus, he was pretty sure Oyaji wanted to adopt his brothers, and this would be a hell of a lot less traumatic for everyone involved. Speaking of, he grinned up at his captain. Oyaji. This is Luffy. Luffy, this is my captain. Hi Mr. Old Mustache, you have a really cool ship. Garara, I think it's pretty cool myself, brat. Oyaji leaned down so he could get a better look at Luffy and Ace felt a swell of pride at the interest he saw in the man's eyes. It took a lot to impress the world's strongest man, and his little shit of a brother had. You're quite the hard one to track down, Luffy. Sheehehehe, Ace and Sabo said you've been looking for me. I was looking for Ace, though. Well, I'm glad you found each other. Tell me, boy, do you know why the Marines are after you? Luffy cocked his head to the side, frowning. No, they said something about a dragon and fruit. I didn't have any fruit though, and I've never seen a dragon. So they were being stupid. Ace wasn't surprised when those on deck gave Sabo a hard look at that. But he could acknowledge it wasn't Sabo's fault Dragon sucked as a father. He patted his brother's shoulder in consolation. He could maybe understand the reasons behind it, and Luffy wouldn't care anyway. But as the big brother he couldn't forgive Dragon. Especially since he had the chance to be a father to Sabo and fucked that up. Turning his brother into a soldier. What an asshole. They were talking about your father, Luffy, Sabo tried to explain. I have a father. You do, Sabo allowed, but he's not a very good one. Oh, okay, Luffy shrugged, that was stupid though, I don't know anything. Oh, how to explain to his brother it didn't matter? Ace knew there was going to be a very awkward conversation in the future. He was going to have to talk about Roger, and Ace hated that. Ace sighed, before putting a smile on his face. Well, now you're here with my crew. What do you think, Lou? I was expecting more bread, but they're cool, Luffy said, earning confused looks. Bread? Yeah, the teen nodded, because you're the white bread pirates, right? So I expected more bread. Wanting to die of secondhand embarrassment at his brother, Ace covered his face, white beard, Luffy, not bread. Oh, okay, sheehehe. But Ace, why doesn't your captain have a beard then? It's so I can confuse the Marines, Oyaji said, a twinkle in his eyes. Ah, I see, very cool Mr. Mustache. Somehow Ace didn't think that was going to be the end of it. There were going to be so many jokes at his brother's expense and he wasn't going to get any of them. But, so long as everyone was having fun he supposed it didn't matter. So, Luffy, what do you think of becoming one of my sons? Oyaji asked. Sabo tensed up but thankfully didn't say anything. Oyaji had given him the same offer a week ago and he'd yet to reply. Though it was obvious to Ace that Sabo was smart enough to understand the question was a formality. Sabo and his two friends were family in Oyaji's eyes, regardless of what their answers were. But Ace also knew pride was a hard thing, and it wasn't going to be easy for Sabo to accept. Though they both knew that if they said anything for or against it, Luffy would do the exact opposite just because. So when their little brother looked at the two of them, they both kept easy smiles on their faces. Luffy's grin widened into something predatory. Ace called you Oyaji. He did, Oyaji replied, and I call him my son. Does he want to be your son, though? Luffy asked, eyes glinting red. The whole crew noticed when Oyaji tensed slightly. Ace knew it was because he'd noticed the eyes. It was getting harder to convince himself it was just head trauma. Especially when Sabo insisted there was something in Luffy, and Ace was beginning to agree. Still, Oyaji was smiling, so the crew waited. And if I said no, then I'd kill you for taking his freedom, Luffy answered, a pulse of conqueror haki radiating from him. Ace felt a wave of affection for his stupid little brother. Idiot, like I'd ever need your help. You'd have it anyway, the younger said, red-eye glancing at him. You're important to me, of course I would. Garara, you're 1,000 years too young to challenge me yet. But if I ever hurt your brother, I'd welcome the challenge. Good. Because the sun would definitely help me. They like Ace and Sabo, too. I see, Oyaji said, leaning back, and is the sun alright with you being my son, then? Luffy shrugged, it's my choice, and I don't know. I've never had a dad, not really. But neither did Ace, and he likes you, so maybe. Maybe is good enough for now. Okay, so Oyaji had just adopted Luffy then. You're welcome here either way. Okay. Luffy replied easily enough. But even if I call you dad, you aren't going to be my captain. I'm gonna be Pirate King, and the king has no captain. Garara, I'll look forward to the day, but until then, feel free to consider this your home. Luffy's answering grin was bright and sharp. Ace found himself grinning as well. Sure, his crew wasn't ready for the crazy that Luffy was going to bring them. That was alright though, they'd adapt and be stronger for it. Better still, Luffy would be free to grow and thrive without the threat of the Marines breathing down his neck. He almost pitied them. When Luffy finally set off on his own journey, he was going to truly be a monster to try and contain. Well, more so than now. Luffy grinned to himself as he laid on his back on the figurehead as he waited for the sun to rise. The Whitebeard pirates were really nice. Even if he was still a bit disappointed by the lack of bread. Still, Luffy knew why Ace stayed. Why Sabo and Ace wanted him to stay. Part of him chafed at the idea. He didn't want to be tied down, hated it in the worst way. Except, he didn't know if it was like that. It felt more like, when Makino asked him to visit, or when Deiden reminded him to come in on cold days. He wasn't sure what to make of it. That was alright though, he could figure it out later. Right now he was going to just lay here and wait for his brothers to wake. He was excited for their 100 fights. His grin got wider, feeling so happy that he got to experience them again. He'd missed sparring with Sabo more than the thought. Sabo had gotten so strong, too. And Ace was much stronger than before. Luffy hadn't won a single match against his brothers, just like old times. He knew he'd also gotten so much stronger, though. It was in the weary looks Ace gave him after he'd landed a blow. The caution before Sabo closed the distance. Luffy had grown. Even if he still couldn't beat them yet, there was always tomorrow, anyway. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Sheehehe, we'll probably lose today, too, Nika said, sitting back up as they took control. They felt Luffy's agreement, as well as his contentment. Luffy might say differently to others, but he never lied to Nika. He was alright if he never beat them. He gave both Luffy and Nika a goal to strive for, and Nika almost felt bad for Luffy's big brothers. It was a lot of pressure to live up to. Having to always be stronger than the one who would be Pirate King. We could stay here for a bit, if you want, Luffy. It wouldn't be safe exactly, but that was fine. Luffy wasn't meant to be coddled. They felt Luffy's unease at the idea, not wanting to be chained down. Still, Nika thought it would be alright. You're right. We aren't meant to be tied down. It would hurt you. I couldn't ever allow that, even if it's what you wanted. And Luffy did. He wanted to stay with his brothers just a bit longer. He wanted to bask in their love, and Nika agreed. They remembered thinking just a short while ago how those ties to Luffy's brothers had hurt. Except, looking back, it hadn't been those ties. It had been the loneliness that has plagued Luffy. The very thing that has first caused their disconnect coming back to haunt Nika. Luffy had done his best, but without his brothers it was impossible to ignore. Nika had just not been enough, and there was no shame in that. Luffy shone the brightest for people he loved. Nika was more a part of Luffy than not at this point. They would always be there for Luffy and support their human. But now Nika realized the remaining 2 years would have been torture for their boy. Luffy would have survived it, but if he didn't need to. Even the sun rests before dawn, you know, Nika told him as they watched light streak across the water. Feeling the grumpiness, Nika laughed. You can get better oven mitts here, I bet, too. Maybe even have some fun adventures. Though there's probably going to be rules, and I know how you feel about that. What do you say, Luffy? Whatever you decide, I'll back you. As the sun rose, Nika shifted Luffy's hat, grin stretching inhumanly wide. The next few years sure were going to be interesting, and Nika couldn't wait to see what his human would do. I'm still kinda shocked he's still on the ship. Haruta commented to Thatch as they watched Ace practically wail on the youngest brother. Thatch winced as Luffy's head collided with the Adam's wood with a dull thunk. I think he missed his brothers. Ace won that one, Luffy, Sabo's voice cut in, one more fight to go. Sheehehe, Ace has gotten a lot stronger. The team cheered, bouncing back to his feet with a wide grin. Are we sure he's not brain damaged? I know medical looked him over, but he hits his head a lot. Haruta glanced at Marco. It can't be good, right? He's rubber, Yue. Apparently he barely even feels it, the other commander shrugged, face pulled in an unpleasant mew as Luffy once again was sent flying. While the spars were horribly one-sided, it was obvious all three brothers were having a blast, so Oyaji had allowed them to continue. It didn't make it comfortable to watch, though. Luffy was beyond outclassed, though for a scrawny 15-year-old kid he was definitely overpowered. Thatch was pretty sure if they had him go toe-to-toe with some of the non-commander members of the crew he'd more or less hold his own for a short time, if not pull a win just by the sheer ridiculousness of some of his attacks. Except no one wanted to fight the kid since Ace and Sabo both were overprotective assholes when they weren't beating the snot out of Luffy. Luffy didn't even seem to notice, either. The kid bounced up to everyone with the same infectious grin and generally got in the way. He was absolutely horrible at most chores, ate more than Ace and Sabo combined, and had zero manners. He should be annoying as hell, and he was. But Luffy was also charming. And Thatch didn't just think that because the brat had saved his life. Luffy was just a ball of sunshine most of the time. He had every reason to be upset after the experience he'd had. First being caught by the Marines, then being on the run, kidnapped at least 3 times they knew of, shot at, beaten, starved, yet Luffy treated the whole thing like it had been one exciting adventure. We still need to get word to Shanks, Haruta sighed, but Oyaji wants to wait for the brat to give him his answer first. It's only been 3 days. It took Ace 100 to answer. Though I heard Sabo told Oyaji yes last night. We all knew he was going to say yes, Yoi. That doesn't mean Luffy'll say yes, though. I'm not even sure he understands the question, Yoi. Is it wrong that I want to punch Dragon? Haruta frowned. I get why he gave Luffy to Garp. I even get why Garp had bandits raise them to an extent, but... Well, at least we know their foster mom cares, Thatch pointed out. Pretty sure she's gonna kill Dragon for turning Sabo into a soldier, honestly. What you talking about? Luffy asked, bouncing over to them. Lost already, Yoi? Sheehehe. Ace and Sabo won't be able to beat me when I'm their age. Thatch let out a groan. Luffy, when you're 18, they'll be 21. You're never going to be the same age. What? The team gaped at him, looking at Marco and Haruta for confirmation. He's right. Sorry, Yoi. I'll just have to train harder, then. Ace, Sabo, how come you never told me this? We did. Repeatedly, Sabo said with a sigh as Ace grinned. Face it, Luffy, you'll never be able to beat us. Will, too? Luffy laughed easily. Thatch somehow doubted it. Sabo and Ace already could hold their own with some of the strongest people in the world. In a few years' time they'd be unstoppable, he bet. Then again, he got the feeling Luffy wasn't bothered much by how impossible his goal seemed so long as he tried. The team grinned widely. So what you talking about? Haruta returned the grin. Just wondering if you were going to give Oyaji your answer anytime soon. Took Ace here 100 days after all. My answer was, no, for those first 100 days. Oyaji just didn't like that answer, Ace pointed out. Something changed in the air, and Thatch felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Luffy had gone completely still. Grin slipping from his face as his hat shaded his eyes. The pressure of Conqueror's hockey leaking from the slip of a boy was off-putting to say the least. Oh? It's fine, Luffy. I changed my mind, Ace replied easily. The teen tilted his head, a glint in his eyes as he stared long and hard at Ace. The pressure grew to the point that others on deck started to take notice. Luffy paid them no mind, every fiber in his being focused on his brother. Thatch swallowed thickly. He had a feeling if Luffy didn't believe Ace, whatever happened wouldn't end well for anyone involved. Luffy might not be quite the powerhouse his brothers were, but he was a hell of a lot more unpredictable and twice as determined. Ace rolled his eyes dramatically. I'm allowed to change my mind, idiot. Did Ace want to? It was Luffy's voice, but it didn't sound right. Ace didn't answer right away. That was mildly concerning, since Thatch could admit they'd kidnapped him and basically forced the issue. At the time, they'd all thought it was for his own good. It occurred to him that Ace might not feel the same way about it even if he agreed to join them in the end. After what felt like an eternity, Ace nodded. Yeah. I did. It was like when you and I first met. Had to get me out of my own head. Ace is stubborn, even when he knows he's wrong, shee. Yeah well. You know how I am about my old man. I heard, son, and dug my damn heels in. But you said yes. Because you wanted to, Luffy. If I wasn't sure, I'd still be trying to kill Oyaji, and you know it. Luffy blinked and the pressure went away as he smiled, as long as Ace has no regrets. None whatsoever. Luffy turned his attention back to the three Whitebeards. I was gonna talk to Mr. Old Mustache later today. Nay, should I attack him instead? That's what Ace did, right? Luffy, remember what Makino said? Sabo asked with a sigh. Ace is not a good role model for relationships. But, number just because we bonded with Ace with murder and attempted fratricide does not mean that is a good way to make friends, remember? It is a lot faster, Ace grunted as Sabo elbowed him hard in the gut. Thatch had so many questions. Questions he probably didn't actually want the answers for. Still he slapped a smile on his face. So, let's grab a bite to eat, and then we'll go hunt down Oyaji, okay? Yeah. Meat. Luffy cheered, taking off towards the gallery. The older pirates all let out sighs. Crisis at least temporarily avoided. The Thatch was pretty sure Luffy was going to at least challenge Oyaji to a fight or dozen. That was tomorrow's problem. Today's problems were making sure their ship brothers and sisters respected whatever answer Luffy gave and trying to put a little more weight on the kid. Notes. Luffy grinned up at the giant of a man. The guy was definitely strong, probably stronger than Gigi even if he looked unhealthy. He gets why Ace and Sabo like the old man, even if he's not exactly sure why they called him Oyaji. Well, Ace calls him both Oyaji and Captain, so maybe it's the same thing. What are you thinking about, brat? That Ace is gonna be really mad if I punch you in the face. He laughed as Ace punched the back of his head. Old Man Mustache grinned. Do you want to punch me? I want to fight you, he shrugged. That involves punching. But Ace and Sabo said not to. So I'm just thinking about it. Ah, the man shifted in his seat, resting his face against his fist even as he continued to grin down at Luffy as the pirates around them shifted uneasily. Originally, Luffy was gonna talk to the old guy in private. But then he'd gotten distracted walking around the ship. Sabo had been really mad when they'd found him sleeping with the mustache dog. He made a lot of funny faces and sounds, and Ace had been steaming. Lots of people had been yelling too for some reason. It had been hilarious, even if he missed dinner. But now he wasn't allowed to meet Mr. Old Mustache alone. Which was annoying because Sabo told him to try and be polite, and Luffy was trying, but, well. Luffy was Luffy. Even he knew it was a lost cause. Have you thought about my question? I have. Luffy replied with a frown. He knew Ace and Sabo wanted him to say yes. They tried to pretend they didn't care what he said, but he knew his brothers better than he knew himself some days. Just because of that, he wanted to say no. He didn't need them to coddle him. He was a lot stronger than he used to be. On the other hand, Ace and Sabo looked so happy when they called Mr. Mustache Oyaji. Of course they'd want to share something that made them happy. Luffy did the same. They were brothers. They shared everything. He just wasn't sure exactly what it was they wanted to share. It wasn't something you could play with, or look at, or eat. It was an idea, and Luffy always had trouble with things like that. Your answer is no, then? Luffy blinked at him, pulled out of his thoughts as he cocked his head to the side. What's a dad, anyway? Silence fell, and Luffy crossed his arms as he waited. Finally the large captain grinned. That's your question? I know that Ace and Sabo hate their fathers. I know dads can be fathers, but I don't understand. Luffy, Ace physically turned his head to look at his brothers. I know you know how babies are made. You know what a father is. Well yeah, Luffy agreed. Even before moving to the jungle, Luffy had an idea. Watching people in the trash heaps and tracking the large deer on the mountain meant Luffy knew where babies came from long before Deiden and Makino tried to explain it. That still didn't answer his question, though. But a dad is different, right? Or is it like how Stelly is Sabo's brother and we're also his brothers? You are 1,000 times better brothers than Stelly ever could be, Sabo told him, but it's a bit like that. So, it's a mystery? Ace? You wanna explain this one? Oyaji's Oyaji and that bastard is that bastard, Ace shrugged. Right, exactly, Sabo nodded in agreement. Luffy pouted. The only time Sabo ever agreed like that is when he didn't know how to explain it, either. That wasn't helpful. Luffy was still trying to wrap his head around the idea that he actually had a father and probably a mother as well. No one has ever brought it up when he was a kid, so he figured no one knew who they were. Which was fine. He had his brothers, and Makino and Deiden and everyone. It was nice to know, but it did hurt a bit that no one had thought to tell him. Well, Ace and Sabo got a pass because they only found out a bit before Luffy. They'd have told him. They didn't keep secrets from each other. It was too much for him and it was making his brain hurt trying to figure it out. I don't get it. Then let me tell you what it means for me when I call someone my son, Mr. Mustache said, and Luffy turned back to him waiting as the man grinned. Those I call my sons and daughters are my treasures. They are mine to protect and cherish. I feel pride in their growth, and would bring the world to its knees to protect their happiness. That sounded like how he felt about Ace and Sabo. A little different, because he knew they were way stronger than he was. But maybe that made sense. Mr. Mustache was also super strong. So of course worrying about him would probably be silly, like worrying about Gigi in a fight. He bet people still worried, anyway. Like Luffy still worried about his brothers even knowing they didn't need his help. He wanted them to be happy, after all. Luffy nodded. My hat is my treasure, but it's not my only treasure. Exactly, my boy. You're still not my captain, Luffy told him. Even if I'm alright being your treasure, you don't get to be my captain. An old man is always happy to see his children set out on their own adventures, he was told. Shee-hee-hee-hee, fine then, Luffy grinned back, pleased with himself as everyone cheered. His chest felt warm and bubbly, but it didn't burn. This new bond wasn't the same as the one with his brothers, but it was still an important treasure Luffy would do his best to protect. Izo let out a sigh as he spotted the newest member to their large family. The brat was sitting alone. A bit surprising since Izo was pretty sure Ace and Sabo were still convinced the boy was going to vanish if no one was watching him. Still, Ace did have work to do, and unless he was mistaken, Sabo was on a loud Denden call with his leader. One that it was best Luffy didn't hear, no doubt. Unfortunately that did leave the child alone, and while Izo doubted Luffy would somehow wander off the ship, it was better to double-check these things. What are you doing? He asked as he came up behind the boy. Luffy stilled slightly, head tipping backwards at an honestly disturbing degree to look at him. Dark eyes blinked slowly before Luffy grinned in recognition. Hi Izozo. Just Izo, he replied, smiling despite himself. Right, the boy nodded, turning his whole body to face the commander. Ace and Sabo are busy, so I tried training on my own. Oh, perhaps I can help. Or at least lurk nearby in case Luffy ended up in the water, again. I don't know if I can keep training though, he said, holding out his hands with a frown. Izo could see why. Both of his hands were red and splotchy like he'd stuck them in boiling water, or directly over a fire. What on earth did you do to yourself? Training. But I forgot I don't have any oven mitts. So it kinda hurts. But not as much as it did before. So don't tell Ace and Sabo, okay? Luffy, he knelt, taking the boy's hands in his. They were almost hot to the touch, and as he turned them to look at the palms he saw blood pooling in the creases. I don't think this training is good for you. It's fine, Luffy shrugged. I'll just eat some meat and it'll be better. That was absolutely not going to happen. If Izo let Luffy into the kitchen like this, it was just asking for an infection, let alone causing panic. He sighed, pulling the boy up with him as he stood. We're going to the infirmary. Why? I'm fine. Luffy, you're bleeding. It's not that much blood, Luffy replied as he trailed after the pirate. Izo wasn't surprised with his reaction, given he remembered Ace's reckless behavior when it came to his injuries. Still, injuries from training need to be looked at. At the blank stare, Izo narrowed his eyes and pulled out the trump card, ship rules. Luffy pouted but stopped protesting. If nothing else, his journey had taught him that ship rules were to be obeyed. Given his general obstinate personality, the crew tried really hard to ignore why that was. No one needed Ace going on a rampage hunting people down after all. Before long they arrived at the infirmary and Luffy was crowded onto a bed, Izo sticking close in case the boy decided coming was good enough and attempted to sneak out when the nurse went to get her supplies. A good thing, too. Luffy. What? The teen asked, looking to the side guiltily as he climbed back onto the bed right as the nurse came back. Izo just raised a well-manicured eyebrow and smirked. Well, I don't know what you've gotten into, but these cuts look like they'll heal in a few days. Do your hands hurt? They look tender? Not really, Luffy shrugged as his fingers were expertly bandaged. Izo was surprised to see that his hands were no longer as red and irritated as before, looking instead like they were slightly sunburned as opposed to boiled. He decided not to mention it as Luffy slid off the bed with a grin as the nurse finished. He knew there would be no point. If the brat was like his big brothers, he would keep doing whatever that training was since it hasn't done any lasting harm. Then again, going off their daily spars and just how hard Luffy got tossed around, if it didn't kill him he'd probably keep at it. The best he could do was let Oyaji know and hopefully someone would catch Luffy before he did something too stupid. Unlikely, but still. Well, now that that's been taken care of, I suggest we head to the gallery. Lunch will be starting soon and I'm sure your brothers will be looking for you. Yay! Meat. Making him eat vegetables was not Izo's problem, thank goodness. Following Luffy, he nodded pleasantly to the crew that wisely got out of the way. Luffy was an unstoppable force when food was involved and more than one person had been run over by the scrawny teen. He hid a chuckle as many of his brothers carefully guarded their drinks once the teen threw himself into the room. While no one had food yet, it was better to be careful. Ace would probably murder someone if Luffy got drunk. Though most of the crew felt that way. They might be pirates, but 15 was a bit young for that kind of behavior. Luffy beamed at him as Izo joined him on the bench, fingers drumming impatiently and drawing his attention back to Luffy's bandaged hands. Ace. Sabo. Meet. Luffy cheered, waving to his brothers. As Izo watched the boy be bullied back into sitting, he decided gloves might be in order. It had only been a short while, yet the bandages were already loose and coming undone. Luffy didn't seem to care and his brothers barely paid any mind as the boy was no longer still bleeding. While he still didn't know how Luffy had managed to damage both hands like that, given the state of them, gloves could only help. Perhaps some new clothes as well. Shanks would be arriving in a few more days, and it wouldn't do for Luffy to still be wearing the same rags he had been when he left his home island. It would be a bad reflection on the care Oyaji gave to his newest son. Even if getting Luffy to change his clothes could be difficult. Alright. Let's make this quick, Ace said, stepping off the striker. Ace, while I agree with you, keep in mind running around town looking for Shanks is going to attract the exact attention we are trying to avoid. Ace narrowed his eyes at his brother before flipping the blonde off and stomping down the dock. He knew Sabo was absolutely right. The whole point of Red Hair breaking off from his crew and meeting them in this tiny port town was to avoid alerting the Marines that the two Yonko were meeting. If the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeards was seen running about town with a stranger, it was going to attract attention. On the other hand, the longer they were away from Moby, the more likely Luffy was going to vanish. Was he being dramatic? Probably. But since Sabo was here with him, he knew his brother agreed. Luffy could not be trusted to stay out of trouble and stay put. Especially if someone let it slip that Shanks was coming, or that Sabo and Ace weren't on the ship. Luffy would either try and find them and get horribly lost, or attempt to run in the opposite direction he thought Shanks was. I still think we should hurry, Ace muttered as Sabo caught up to him. He's going to notice we're gone. Yes, but if we're lucky, sparring with Juzo and Numar will keep him distracted till at least noon. Then there's lunch, and after that Oyaji said he'd keep him busy with stories, Sabo replied, ever the level-headed brother with the plan. They both knew Luffy had definitely noticed they were missing already as they'd left before the youngest had woken up. It was a matter of if he realized they weren't on the ship or not. Still, it had been Sabo to suggest that he and Ace go. While it was a risk Luffy would realize they'd left, there was less of a chance someone accidentally letting it slip that they were picking up Shanks. There had already been a few close calls of Luffy overhearing something about Shanks coming, and Ace's nerves were shot to hell. Waiting 2 more days for one of the others to pick him up as part of a supply run, and then make the return trip? Nope, he'd die of stress, and Sabo agreed. It was pure genius that his brother had realized Ace's flames couldn't even if Ace tried, hurt him. The Mera Mera no Mi was volatile in a fight, but also protective of what Ace considered his. Meaning that they could go in tandem on the striker even though it wasn't made for 2. Sabo'd been safe and comfortable on the trip there. Ace was sure Duce was going to be annoyed about that later. The poor man had ended up slightly singed even though Ace had tried his hardest to not burn him the few times his friend joined him. The plan for the trip back was simple. They'd slap a tow line on whatever dingy Shanks was using and Sabo'd hold tight as Ace got them home in record time. Assuming they found Shanks before noon, they'd be back by dinner and be able to sneak the red-headed pirate on board before Luffy noticed. Assuming they found Shanks, alright, how are we doing this? I'll take the bars to the left side of town, you take the bars to the right? Sabo, that's going to take forever. It's that or start a fight to draw him out, and again, low profile, his brother reminded him. Ace nodded reluctantly, alright. How do we let the other one know we found him? In case you're forgetting, we don't have personal denden. I hadn't forgotten you tend to roast them, but that is a problem. Sabo frowned. I guess we'll meet back at the docks in 2 hours. That gives us both time to find him and get some food. Or get some food, find Shanks, then grab a bite, Ace grinned. A look Sabo returned with interest, dine and dash. Yeah, that'd get the town buzzing, okay. Let's grab a quick bite, then go looking. Given their first order of business was food and not bar crawling, they made their way to the first inn right past the docks. Most port towns had such locations that offered a room for the night and whatever the cook had over the fire. Not often particularly appetizing food, but it did tend to be filling enough to get the 2 bottomless pits through the day in a pinch. Sabo held the door open, offering a mocking bow as Ace puffed out his chest and strode into the building. Only to stop right inside the door, causing Sabo to walk into him. Ignoring the smack to the back of the head that he probably deserved, Ace strode over to the only occupied table and pulled out one of the empty chairs before sitting on it backwards. Found them, he told his brother a bit smugly as Shanks snapped the newspaper closed and slid it over to his first mate. That wasn't skill, that was dumb luck, Sabo grumped as he sat as well, nodding to the matron of the establishment to let her know they'd like a meal. Ace grinned at his brother, still counts. His grin became a little sharper as he met Shanks' eyes. Shanks. Thought you were supposed to be coming alone? Huh. I might like the old man, but even I'm not foolish enough to go without some sort of backup, Shanks replied, and Ace tipped his head, conceding the point. I'm also going in order to prevent Captain Idiot from starting an incident by trying to kidnap the kid, Ben Beckman huffed around his cigarette. Yeah, he wouldn't like that much, Sabo pointed out dryly, let alone what the old man would think about it. I don't think I've had the pleasure of meeting ya, kid, Shanks said with a smile that was only a little bit of a threat. Sabo, also known as the smarter one. The smile became friendlier, the not-so-dead one, right? Thanks for looking out for the shits. I could say the same thing, Sabo replied over the sound of Ace sputtering. After their food was delivered, Sabo's own smile took on an edge. So, mind telling me what was in the paper that had you so distracted you didn't notice us until we joined you? There's no point in hiding it from you two. I'm sure your captain has already seen today's paper. Beckman flipped open the paper with a frown. In the center was a new bounty poster. Ace felt his blood pressure rise as he took in the image above the bounty. A laughing boy with a wide grin was front and center, a completely wrecked ship in the background, To someone who didn't know the boy, he'd look carefree, but there was a slight tightness at the edge of his smile that spoke of anxiety to Ace. He'd always hated that particular look on his little brother. It was the look that Luffy got when someone did or said something particularly cruel. Below the image was the damning words, "Wanted alive. Monkey D. Luffy." Alive only, huh? Guess they're still planning on trying to use him against the army, Sabo sighed. They've got to know it won't work, though. Their leader is a hard ass. He's gonna put his goals before his kid. They definitely want him dead because of that. Paint his father in a bad light. Even being Garp's grandkid wouldn't earn alive only either, Ace pointed out. I may have an idea as to why, Shanks admitted, but it's not something to be shared here. Meaning it was something Oyaji needed to know. Ace nodded. Well, look at it this way. You can always use the argument that since he has a 60 million bounty, he technically has become a great pirate. Sabo shook his head as he looked over the paper. Ace, we both know Lu'll say it doesn't count because it's alive. According to this, his epitaph is, "The Laughing Child." Deliberate comparison to Nico Robin? Possibly, Beckman agreed, or because he kept laughing at the Marines as he kept slipping through their fingers. That was more likely, knowing Luffy as they all did. Without another word, the three pirates and one revolutionary pirate stood, leaving money for the meal. Ace stretched as they left the building. All right, let's get your ship and get going. I'd rather be back before he realizes he has a bounty. Edward Newgate was generally not a nice man towards enemy crews. He knew his reputation was well earned and he didn't regret it. It helped protect his children, to say nothing of the feeling it gave the Gura Gura no Mi. While the Paramecia was easygoing enough, it definitely enjoyed shaking things up. Newgate's drastically different reputation between the islands under his protection versus those outside it entertained the fruit. Oftentimes when he demonstrated the power for upstart rookies quaking in their boots, he'd feel a waft of amusement from his power. Amusement that had grown since a young boy in a straw hat had ended up on his ship. He could understand why. Luffy had proven himself a wild card that had definitely shaken up the Marines. The shake-up to his family hadn't been half as violent, but he could see the tremors even in those who hadn't even met the brat. Luffy was going to be a force to be reckoned with in a few years. I see why you bet your arm on him, Red Hair, he grinned as Shanks made his way over to him. Shanks acknowledged his words by raising his mug, still pouting that Luffy had absolutely refused to come out of the second commander's room to say hi. Judging by the smug look Ben had been sporting since Luffy'd taken off for the room the moment he'd spotted Shanks' hair, it was expected by both the other pirates. The other Yonko had taken the good-natured teasing well even as the party got into full swing. Though none had been surprised when he'd offered to take food to the room where all three brothers were hiding out in. Whitebeard had allowed it, though another Yonko walking freely below deck was annoying. He would deal with it for the sake of their joint child. The one who didn't run away from him. Besides, Ace and Sabo had been there to prevent Luffy from trying to climb out the window. The Marines aren't looking for him here at least, Shanks huffed out as he sat. Yet, Whitebeard pointed out, we've managed to keep the brat aboard for now, but it's a matter of time. That's what I'm worried about. Well, that and this, alive, business. He laughed slightly, not that Luffy cares at all about it. You know what he just shouted through the door at me? That it didn't count as a bounty, and if they tried to take him alive, they'd regret it again. Sounds like him, he grinned, completely unsurprised by his youngest even as it had his heart clenching in fear. He's a reckless kid, always has been. You know that scar on his face? Did it to himself. Stole a knife off of lime juice and just stabbed himself in the damn face. Was there a reason? He couldn't think of a good reason, but there had to be, right? Luffy was a fun-loving goofy kid. Didn't strike Whitebeard as particularly self-destructive. Wanted to prove he was brave. So he'd take him out to sea, Shanks sighed. He was so lonely back then, old man. Lonely and, though I didn't know, angry about it. I just saw this bratty kid who wanted to play pirate at first. It took a while before I realized that this kid just wanted a friend, even if it was a drunk pirate. When I did, well, couldn't keep me away. He was a brash little shit. Complete brat in the way of the worst type of street urchins. He laughed at that, long and loud. He remembered what it was like to be that sort of brat, even if it was decades past. He'd been older when he'd finally taken to the sea and still carried some of that raw greed that was special to those who'd lived scorned on land. Still, though Luffy had that hunger, the raw anger that sort of life left was missing. Or, not missing. Muted behind a wide grin and an infectious laugh. I'd almost wished to have seen it. Better still, the three of them together as feral brats. Oh no, please. We both know Ace is a hothead now, but he was apparently a murderous little shit. And Sabo? Well, I think we both know what kind of brat he'd have to have been to keep up with that. He replied, not acknowledging the unspoken confirmation that the younger pirate knew exactly who Ace was. It's doubtful Goat Kingdom would still be standing if they hadn't been forcefully separated. It's doubtful it'll be standing when they go back, you mean? Those two are protective of Luffy, which is bad enough, but with what happened to Sabo, Luffy won't stand for it. He won't care if Sabo's moved on, either. Honestly, could be a problem down the line. There's also the issue of Dragon. Whitebeard held up his hand to forestall the interruption. Regardless of how you or I feel about his parenting or lack thereof of our son, we both can acknowledge he cares. Just shit at showing it. Garp's a damn marine hero, and even he showed more care. Hell, even Usopp manages to send letters home now and again to his kid. There's a special place in hell is all I'm saying, regardless of his reasons, Shanks growled. I believe Sabo and Ace might have strong feelings on the subject as well. Apparently up until we clarified that Dragon was his father and not an animal. Luffy had never heard of the man. Ace should never be allowed near Dragon. He'll fucking roast him, and that Sabo kid'll probably bring marshmallows. Boss or not, he's gonna side with his brothers. That was my take on the matter. Which is why I may have informed Dragon that I've claimed Sabo and his two friends as payment for getting involved in this mess. But not Luffy. Shanks grinned wickedly. Luffy is free to leave if he wishes. While he has agreed to be my son, he has been quite clear I am not his captain. And what sort of parent would I be if I caged him to my ship? The other Yonko nodded, a look of respect reflected in his eyes. While they often clashed, both were fiercely possessive people, as most pirates were. Shanks knew that Whitebeard truly saw Luffy as one of his sons, as the man felt the same. Yet both had to come to terms with letting the boy chart his own course. For Shanks, it was probably a bit easier. He'd had longer to come to terms with the idea, even if Newgate was sure the other man was in as much of a panic over recent events. You're still not gonna let him go off on his own, right? Not for a few years, right? I mean, this bounty? Is pretty lame, sheehehe. We're worth at least double that, don't you think? Luffy asked. His eyes glinting red as he flopping down an equal distance between the two as he grinned a bit too widely at them. Last chance, Luffy. You sure you don't want to join the party? Sabo asked as Ace laid down. Luffy smiled and shook his head. I told Shanks I would meet him after I become a great pirate, so I can't. I hate to say it, but with the bounty you have, technically. Ace is being stupid, he huffed, it doesn't count. Because it says alive, yeah I know. And because I wasn't a pirate when I got it, Luffy nodded. Sabo gave him a soft smile as he joined them on the bed after dimming the lights. It doesn't count because you were trying to find us, not start trouble, huh? Exactly, if it goes up because I do something now, then it'll count and I will get to see Shanks. Good try, but I don't think Oyaji is gonna buy that as an excuse to let you loose on some island, Ace snorted. He is the kind of guy who doesn't like to share, Sabo agreed. Plus, I personally would feel better if you didn't run off causing chaos for a while, Luffy. I just got you back, after all. Luffy made a humming noise as he nuzzled between his brothers. He couldn't agree to that. It would be so boring, and what was the point of a boring adventure? But, Luffy understood what Sabo and Ace really meant, even if they all pretended he didn't. His adventure had been exciting and a lot of fun, but it had also been very dangerous. Not in the challenging way, either. Not even in the swallowed rocks feeling when he'd gotten in way over his head. No, this was the danger that even the sun had felt uneasy about. Luffy might not understand exactly what the danger was, but the sun did, and if they said it was bad, Luffy believed it. It hadn't been constant, but it had been growing the longer the adventures had continued. A danger Luffy knew he wasn't ready to face, especially by himself. So maybe he would stay close to his big brothers for a while. Go on adventures with the other people on this crew. For now though, he had his brothers here, Oyaji and everyone else was near, and Shanks was close by too. Things were good, even if he was missing out on the party. Nika waited till all three were sound asleep before slowly peeling themselves away from Ace and Sabo. Both of them had been really clingy with Luffy since being reunited. That was good, it helped smooth the rough spots being alone so long had caused. Luffy always shone brightest for his brothers, and Nika loved them for that. Even Sabo, though the amnesia bit was still annoying. Imagine forgetting their Luffy. It didn't matter much though. Sabo was back, and Luffy was having fun. Luffy was soaking up the affection like a rock in the sun, reflecting it back to everyone as they helped guide Nika's human to be stronger, faster, better. Even when the people here didn't really understand, they helped. But they could help more if they understood, Nika thought. Except, it was more fun to keep everyone guessing. Shanks though. That pirate man knew, and the old captain should also know, probably. Especially if those marines keep hunting Nika's Luffy. Luffy would be sad if they got hurt because they didn't know, but Luffy couldn't tell them because Luffy never asked what he didn't know. Their human was the best because of that. Always pulling out every drop of fun. Coming up to where the two pirates in question were sitting, Nika felt their face stretch into a grin. The men looked so serious and worried. They could tell how much the two cared for Luffy because of it. Party going in here, they were putting off the fun. You're still not gonna let him go off on his own, right? Not for a few years, right? I mean, this bounty? Is pretty lame, sheehehe. We're worth at least double that, don't you think? They asked, sitting to the side of both men and grinned. Luffy was worth the world. His bounty should reflect that. Luffy, the old captain rumbled, a weary amusement on his face. I thought you didn't want to see Shanks yet. Luffy doesn't, Nika agreed. He promised and Luffy keeps his promises. The grin stretched wider as he laughed at the confused look. This was so much fun. Nika, Shanks interrupted him with a frown. I thought you were going to sleep. They shrugged. I did for a bit, but Luffy is stubborn. Always tugging and pulling, asking to play. How could I sleep long? You're not hurting Anchor then? Nika felt his grin change to a warm smile. Luffy always picked the best humans, even back when he'd been a grumpy broken thing rushing to his death with a determination that burned bright. Luffy is my favorite, you know. It wasn't quite an answer, but it was the best Nika could do. And judging by the rueful look Shanks gave them before taking a large drink, the man understood. Luffy wasn't one to be coddled, and Nika could hardly refuse their boy, not really. They did try, though. Luffy was getting stronger, but it would still be a while before the boy could tap into everything Nika was without dying. Even if the power rippled and pooled around Luffy, begging to be used. It was as annoying as it was funny, Nika exercising restraint. Shanks turned his attention to Whitebeard. This asshole is why Luffy is only wanted alive. Oh, the larger man leaned in. You'd be Red Eyes that my son spoke of, right? Sheehehehe, it's as good a name as any, Nika agreed. Golden eyes narrowed. You're not a Paramecia, then. The Gum no Mi apparently has an older name. Shanks spat and Nika didn't take it personally. They knew it was concern for Luffy that fed that rage, not them. Not anymore, one the government knows. And do I get to know this name? Whitebeard asked. I don't mind, Nika said, interrupting Shanks, but only if you keep it a secret. Luffy doesn't want anyone to tell him. He wants to figure it out on his own. That's going to take forever, Shanks pointed out as Nika laughed. It was taking a while, but that was because they were both having fun. It's fine. Luffy knows me, he just doesn't know my name. Son, Whitebeard nodded, he speaks of the sun sometimes. Sheehehe, yep. I love how confused it makes everyone. They think he means sun, not sun. Of course you'd find that funny, Shanks said, but he was grinning. Yep. They looked at Whitebeard. My true name is Sun God Nika, but names aren't as important as Luffy. So you can call me Gum or Sun or Red Eyes. Thanks for taking care of Luffy. Of course I'd take care of him. Even if he hadn't chosen to be my son, I would. Nika believed him. I know. Luffy knows, too. Ace and Sabo are his most important people, and you made Ace happy when Luffy wasn't there. It's why he agreed. Your Ace is Shanks. So Anchor does think of me as a dad then? Shanks asked, suddenly excited. I don't know. Humans are funny weird things. I just know Luffy, and you're still one of the good things, even after all this time. The redhead smiled softly at that, nodding. I feel the same about him. And the other two brats, so help me. Of course. They're Luffy's brothers. They may not be mine as Luffy is, but they are still mine. Gurarara, possessive thing, aren't you? Nika waved the accusation off. Luffy is possessive. Luffy needs them, so I need them. Without those bonds, I can't keep Luffy safe. I thought you changed that. Are you saying your power is still too much for him? Shanks asked, tense with worry. My full power would kill Luffy instantly, Nika nodded, but that's not the problem. That seems like a big problem to me. No, it usually takes time for a fruit to awaken. The fact that Nika is fully aware before Luffy is able to handle that power is odd, but it's not surprising Luffy's body can't keep up with the power. He is still a brat, after all. Shehehehe, exactly, with my last human, I drifted a lot, but Luffy would have died if I hadn't stepped in. I don't want Luffy to die though. Which is why we need those bonds. He saw the moment without them. It's not fun, is it? Not for Luffy at least. Nika nodded. I didn't notice at first. Then they were gone and it hurt Luffy. I thought it was because he wasn't free, tied to them. But Luffy is the funniest human. His bonds make him free. Whitebeard nodded. I'm much the same, my bonds bring me happiness. Nika tilted their head to the side as Shanks nodded along. No wonder Luffy liked these two so much. They understood Luffy's need for others. The Marines want to take those bonds away. It will kill Luffy because I won't allow them to break my human. That can't happen, I won't lose Luffy. Both men nodded and Nika supposed it didn't really need to be said. Luffy's personality was such that he'd bite his own tongue out if someone tried to cage him. Still, they worried for their reckless human. We'll do our best to prevent that, Shanks said, though I for one would feel better if Luffy was able to use your powers safely, so escape would be a better option if they did somehow catch him. Agreed. It might cause a dangerous strain on him, though, Whitebeard agreed. Luffy is working on it, but I don't know how to teach him those human tricks to make it safer. What human tricks? Shanks asked. You know, how that power you tried on me when we met, or when the old man Garp is able to hurt Luffy by hitting him. I can't teach that, I just know what they feel like for me, so it's slow going. Shanks' mouth fell open. Hockey. You need someone to teach him hockey. Those who awaken their fruits always have mastered at least one hockey, myself included. I'd always thought it was a coincidence, but hockey is not just physical strength. Shanks stood excitedly, and the mental strength you need for hockey is what allows the user to handle the power influx. Shehehe, so you can help him? Hell yes, we can. Of course. Good, Nika stood. I need to get back. Luffy is waking, and I won't let him break his promise. Right, Shanks nodded, he looks good. You've done well by Anchor. So thank you, for protecting him. Of course, Nika nodded, walking away. Luffy is my most favorite, after all. Sabo glanced up as the door to the room opened, only noticing Luffy's absence as the form of his younger brother entered the room. Red eyes met his and a large grin split Luffy's face. Shehehe, did I wake you? Who WJWT? Ace's head snapped up. Oops. Red eyes laughed as they walked over and flopped across them. What the hell, Luffy? Ace groaned, more awake now. Not Luffy, was the sing-song reply. Sabo snorted, it's our old friend. How the hell are you so light? Luffy's rubber, but he's still solid muscle and you're in his body. Ace sat up at that, red eyes rolling to land in their laps as they continued to giggle. It was a manic sound, and it raised the hair on the back of Sabo's neck. It was clear to him Ace was affected as well. The eldest narrowed his eyes, flames flickering on his shoulder as he glared down at the laughing being. What's so funny? You, was the happy reply. You're so worried I'm gonna take him away while you're sleeping, but you slept through it. Shehehe. Both brothers shared a look of chagrin. We did, Sabo allowed. But Luffy said he didn't want to see Shanks, so he kinda expected him to stay put. I didn't promise anything, Red Eyes laughed. Look, whatever or whoever you are, you can't just take Luffy like that. Ace snapped. In case you missed it, people are hunting him. The smile slipped and the thing in Luffy sat up. I know. Then why? Sabo asked, not even sure what he meant. To keep Luffy safe, the being shrugged. Luffy can't share what he doesn't know. So you really, Ace frowned, but Luffy said you're a paramecia. The grin was back. I never told Luffy anything, sheehehe. Shanks said my fruit was the gum-gum, of paramecia. The only reason Ace didn't combust was probably because Luffy was on his lap. Sabo knew Ace's fire would never hurt them, but he appreciated the control, so you're saying Shanks lied to our little brother. Ace, brother dear, you can't kill Shanks. I need to punch him first. Why? The expression was so Luffy it drew him up short. Because he lied to Luffy. He put our little brother in danger, no offense. He didn't know, Red Eyes frowned, so it wasn't a lie. Sabo cursed under his breath, the world government, then. Meaning you're a threat to them, whichever fruit you really are. That's why they want Luffy. They want you. I won't let them, Red Eyes told them flatly. I can't be sorry, though. No, I get it, Ace replied, waving it off to Sabo's surprise. Ace must have seen it on his face. Some people are more compatible with their fruit than others, according to Oyaji and Marco. Maramara and I are like that, and well. Luffy's always been able to use his abilities so. That makes sense, Sabo agreed, not that it would matter. You're a part of Luffy now so we're stuck with you. The grin was back, just as wide but warmer, sheehehe, I think, even without Luffy, I'd like you too. You can call me. Nope, stop right there. We want to hear it from Luffy, Ace replied. When he figures it out, Sabo said, cutting off Red Eyes before they could speak, but for now. It's late, and I'd like my brother back. There was a moment, a pause where Luffy's body was completely still. Then Luffy blinked. Eyes dark once more as he threw himself at them with a grin, Ace, Sabo. Seriously, how are you suddenly heavier, Sabo grunted. Sheehehe, silly Sabo. The sun doesn't have weight, because he floats. Sabo filed that tidbit away for later as he returned the hug. You little shit, you were listening in, weren't you? Ace grumped, wrapping Luffy upside the head as the boy laughed around a yawn. Sharing a look at Ace, he pulled Luffy closer, idiot, don't exhaust yourself for no reason. I love you, Luffy grumbled sleepily, cuddling in like the clingy octopus he had been as a child when the world was big and scary. Sabo supposed the world was still big and scary. Especially when the world was hunting you. Sabo knew he and Ace would have to have a talk sometime soon. It went without saying they'd protect Luffy, since he was definitely still too weak to take care of himself. Luffy was too stubborn to ask for help, even when he was scared and in over his head. That was alright, though. That's what big brothers are for. Well, that and their extended family, Sabo supposed, still somewhat unbelieving that it wasn't just the three of them versus the world. He'd use that though. He'd use everyone and everything to protect his brothers. Not bad, Luffy. I think you might be getting the hang of it. Thatch cheered only to wince when Juzo's hand collided with the teen's head. I don't know if this is helping, Yoi. Nah, it is. He's being hit less often. Speaking of being hit less often, Ace, how's your hockey training going? Sabo smiled sweetly at his brother. Thatch laughed as the fiery young man pouted and bumped shoulders with him. Oyaji has him practicing with a sea stone cuff on because he keeps turning into fire. Not deliberately, Ace protested, I'm not Luffy, I do understand the point of the spars. It's just, the Maramara keeps jumping in. Even when I'm keeping it tapped down. It's trying to protect you, Yoi. In the long run, it's good the Maramara is so invested in your safety. Though it is a bit frustrating at the moment. I think it's more like it's fucking with Ace, Sabo grinned. Making it harder so he pushes himself more. Ace used to do the same thing to Luffy all the time as kids. Fuck, you're probably right. Meanwhile, Luffy doesn't understand what we're expecting him to do, and according to Oyaji Red Eyes won't be much help, Thatch sighed. Luffy learns by doing, Ace shrugged, always had. Most devil fruit don't truly become aware until the user has at least the basics of Haki, Yoi. There's no reason for the fruit to understand Haki because of it. I'd at least used Conqueror's Haki before, so there's a reason my fruit is awake enough to be a shit about everything, Ace agreed. Luffy's is just weird. Weird but friendly enough, Thatch mused. He'd interacted once or twice late at night in the kitchen with Red Eyes. They were obviously very dangerous and Thatch had a feeling if Luffy himself didn't like him, the fruit wouldn't be so open in saying hi. As it was, it always put the 4th Division commander on edge. The smile looked friendly but there was something about it that screamed dangerous. It was a bit too wide, even for Luffy. Yet at the same time, Thatch wasn't afraid. Red Eyes obviously adored Luffy, and because Luffy liked Thatch, Red Eyes did, too. At least enough to share a laugh and a wink as they shoved an entire buffet into Luffy's mouth at 1 in the morning. "That's 100, Luffy," Sabo called, drawing his attention back to the spar. Luffy yanked off his blindfold and pouted at his brother. "No fair, I can keep going." "But Juzo has other things to do, Yoi," Marco reminded their youngest. "Please, Sparkly, just a few more," Thatch snorted at that, though judging by the fond but exasperated look on his brother's face, this nickname was one Luffy was stuck on. It happened sometimes, but had no apparent reason. The teen would just switch to a nickname out of the blue for people and use it exclusively. Occasionally he'd switch back to the person's real name, but there didn't seem to be any pattern for that, either. "No, sorry kid. And it's Juzo," he added like an afterthought. "That's what I said," Luffy huffed. "Tomorrow then?" "Yes, we can spar some more tomorrow." Juzo smiled down at the teen. "You're getting better, Luffy. I'm impressed." "Sheehehehe, thanks," Luffy grinned, pulling up his hat and turning that smile to his brothers. "Ace, Sabo, meet." "Fine you glutton, let's do some fishing," Ace easily agreed. Thatch was thankful for that. The Luffy ate a lot more than he'd originally anticipated. While he wouldn't let the boy go hungry, it was a balancing act as they hadn't made it to port since Luffy had come on board and there was only so much supply runs could do without a full restock. Fishing had helped alleviate some of the issues that went along with having 3 bottomless pits on board while also buying time for Oyaji to decide what to do next. With Shanks' visit a few days ago, Oyaji had finally given the orders to head to one of the islands under their protection. It would still be a bit before they arrived, though, so Thatch was trying to make their supplies last. Not to mention using his free time to do a full inventory and see what they'd need now that Luffy was staying with them for the foreseeable future. Luckily that meant he was exempt from the "How Not to Lose Luffy on the Island" committee. Thatch wished them the best of luck with that. For a kid who was so ridiculously energetic and charismatic, Lucy was pretty damn sneaky when he wanted to be. Or even when he didn't want to be. They still hadn't figured out how he managed to avoid getting caught so thoroughly, let alone how he crossed the red line. And Ace and Sabo were absolutely no help. When asked they just said it's because it's Luffy, which, fair. He wished them the best of luck trying to keep Luffy on the island. Luckily they still had a few more days to plan. It occurred to Thatch then, that maybe teaching Luffy observation haki was not the best idea if they wanted to not lose him. Letting out a silent sigh at the thought, he resolved to tell Oyaji tonight. Teaching Luffy haki had been his idea after all. Slipping away from most of the people on deck has been ridiculously easy for Luffy. Everyone was busy getting ready to dock, so they didn't notice one lone teen who slingshot himself to land. Luffy laughed to himself as he finally heard the shout of alarm coming from the ship as he slipped into town. It sounded like his brothers at least noticed he was missing. "Oops, sheehehe." He grinned widely as he snuck down an alleyway just as a plume of fire lit up the sky by Moby. Apparently his brothers were coming. Luffy understood they were worried. They thought he was gonna go exploring, which he was of course. But he wasn't planning on exploring other islands and ships. He just wanted to check out this island. Luffy liked traveling with Oyaji and everyone, he really did. But he was getting, not bored, antsy. Originally he wanted to have an adventure with his brothers. Except, when he'd mentioned it, Ace and Sabo got all twitchy and weird. Started saying how they should maybe stay on the ship. That was too boring. So Luffy figured it would be better for everyone if he had his own mini-adventure. And then they could come find him, which would be fun, too. Probably. The scolding he was gonna get wouldn't be so fun. That was a problem for later Luffy, though. The island seemed lively. He hadn't seen any woods or forest from the ship, just a few fields. Fields and towns, maybe a city. Grinning to himself, he switched to another street and worked his way away from the docks. Wouldn't do for the game of tag to go too fast. Which meant he probably shouldn't go running over to where those awesome smells were coming from. He'd just head over to the shops, then. Oyaji had given him some money, and there were a lot of people he wanted to thank. Asterisk 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 asterisk. On there they go. Thatch laughed as Ace took off, Sabo clinging to him. Gararara, foolish brats. The boy will be back in time for dinner. You're awfully calm about this, Oyaji, Marco commented, looking to where their father sat grinning. What are you planning, Yoi? Brats should be allowed to be brats and have fun every now and then, he told them. Haruta crossed their arms, frowning as they watched Ace and Sabo reach the dock. Is it really safe for Luffy to be running wild here, though? He might cause trouble. It should be fine. We're well within our territory, so the boy should be safe enough. I think the issue is he might vanish again, Izo. Thatch shook his head at Juzo. He'll be back. Everything Luffy cares about is here, isn't it? Marco had to smile at that. His youngest brother was pretty simple to figure out. It wasn't that he was stupid, he just didn't put a lot of effort into things he found boring. So when Luffy cared about something, you knew it. He loved freely and fiercely, too. So with that in mind, Thatch was right. Luffy would be back ready to tell them everything after he had some fun. He is a bit like a puppy, isn't he? Izo sniffed, hiding his own smile behind a fan. Gararara, let them have fun. He may not act it, but I'm sure the brat was shaken by what happened. Let him run wild a bit under our protection. Oyaji has a point. Luffy's not as violent as Ace or Sabo about it, but he's not one for rules. Unless he wants to follow them, Yue. We've been asking a lot of him, and if he doesn't blow off some steam he might explode. Luffy? He's a sweetheart, Haruta sounded scandalized. Luffy is the same shit that you couldn't track down for months, Juzo pointed out. He might not be like his brothers, thank the gods, but he is a chaos gremlin just the same. Everyone let a sign out at that. Even when Luffy wasn't trying to be, things just kept happening around him. That was alright, though. Just made them all fiercely protective of the little shit. Damn world government trying to snuff out that spark before it could really get going. They could claim it wasn't bad, Laughing Child's bounty was only alive after all. Except, anyone who knew Luffy knew he would die in such a cage as the Marines had planned for him. If that happened, well, Ace and Sabo wouldn't be the only ones making the world burn for it. Luffy was their little brother now, too. They might not be able to spoil or coddle him, but his freedom and happiness was something the Whitebeards would gladly fight for. Well, Ace and Sabo are on Luffy duty. Let's get stocked up while they're busy, Yoi. After that we party, my sons. As the others all cheered, Marco sighed, trying to shake the uneasy feeling he had. The island was quiet, in the middle of their territory, and there hadn't been a report of any Marines or pirates within 2 days' sail. Cutting loose for a bit shouldn't cause any problems, fine, yo. Then we party. How in the hell does this always happen? Ace screamed as he scooped up Luffy. The little shit had fallen over laughing when one of the Marines chasing them had been punted into a building. Sabo neatly jumped over the chunk of rubble that would have landed on their baby brother and kept running, Luffy effect. What the fuck? Ace ducked under a tentacle the size of a tree trunk, is that? Koala says it's Luffy's ability to find trouble where there is none, said one brother. Land Kraken, cheered the other. Ace wanted to hit them both, but chose to keep running. He and Sabo had been on Luffy's trail for the better part of the day as the little idiot made his way out of the port town into the massive fields of grain, where he had somehow found a marine base hidden smack dab in the middle of Oyaji's turf. That was fine, though. The Marines had been surprised, of course. Luffy had caused his usual mayhem as they tried to catch him. Then Ace and Sabo'd shown up like avenging angels before their little brother got too overwhelmed. Not the greatest, but the base was destroyed and the Marines were running around like they'd just kicked over an anthill, so it would have taken a while before the Marines realized Luffy was with Whitebeard. Probably. Except then this fucking thing showed up, clawing itself out from the crater Luffy had punched right smack into the ground of the base. Why the hell is there a squid on land? Octopus, Sabo grunted as the beast flung another Marine. Fine, he snapped back. Why is there an octopus on land and why is it chasing us? Land Kraken. Luffy laughed, and it's my friend. It doesn't like the Marines, either. They built their stupid base on his home. So it's not following us, it's following the Marines, Sabo groaned. Who are following us? Fuck, Luffy, get your friend to stop throwing Marines at us at least. Sheehehehe. Okay. Mr. Takoyaki. Throw them the other way, please. Ace didn't know what was more surprising, that Luffy named his new friend after food or that the damn thing listened. He'd learned a long time ago not to question the weird-ass shit that happened around his brother, though. Noticing a flash of bright blue in the air, Ace let up a spit of flame. Marco. Ace Yoi. Looks like you found Luffy, Marco smirked, keeping pace with them from above. Hi, Marco. The team cheered from Ace's back because like hell he was letting the idiot run off again. Luffy. Did you see my new friend? Marco cast a glance back at the edge of the town where the massive octopus was enthusiastically flinging marines into the distance. So far it hadn't tried to enter the town, but Ace wasn't sure if that would last. Octopus needed water and the town was between it and the ocean. The land kraken woke up. Huh? Ace nearly tripped. Are you for real? Luffy wasn't making things up? They are pretty rare, yoi. This one is actually why Oyaji protects this island. He's not going to be happy that the Marines found it. If it helps, I don't think they were looking for it, Sabo grunted, just a bad coincidence. Marco nodded, flapping a little harder to gain height. I'll let the others know. We'll take care of the stragglers, you just get Luffy back to the ship, yoi. Hey, I wanna help. You've helped enough, Ace snapped, slightly panicked at the idea of losing sight of Luffy while Marines were running around. Sabo offered a smile. Without you, we would never have known about the Marines here. And you got rid of the base on top of Mr. Takoyaki, right? So, you have helped, little brother. Just leave the rest to the others, alright? But, I bet Thatch has dinner ready for us, Ace pointed out, plus you got first crack at them. Let everyone else have a turn. Luffy was still pouting, but he stopped trying to get down. Ace would take it, though. He just wanted to get his brother safely on the ship. He doubted there were any particularly strong Marines left. Luffy had already done quite a number on the group back at base. But there were a lot of them, and at least a few had recognized his brother. Meaning that the Marines weren't going to stop trying to capture his little brother until they'd been completely removed from the island. Knowing Oyaji, it'll only take a few hours, but it would be better for everyone if Luffy was on the ship during that time. He couldn't tell Luffy that, though. Because then Luffy would be more determined to help in the fight. Ace understood that. But he also understood how fiercely protective Oyaji and his ship brothers were. If they wanted the town to still be standing, Luffy couldn't get involved. Maybe while we eat, you can tell us how the hell you found the marine base, Sabo teased as they reached the ship. Luffy shrugged. I wanted to see who was so angry, but I'd be angry too if someone put a rock in front of my door and wouldn't let me out, too. Ace took a deep breath and shared a look with Sabo. He for one hadn't heard anything, and he was pretty damn sure the Marines had been surprised when the tentacles had surged forth from the cement floor Luffy had cracked in their base. He wanted to blame Red Eyes, but Luffy was plenty weird on his own. Hearing an animal no one else could wasn't that unusual for him, really. But, they should probably tell Oyaji. And remind Luffy again to tell them when he hears things like that. Maybe Oyaji could explain what the hell was a land kraken was, too. GARP. Garp looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading in his office, blinking in surprise at the anger in Sengoku's voice. He didn't remember doing anything particularly annoying the last few days. Not that he could. They still wouldn't let him leave. And after the last batch of cadets had filed an official complaint, he wasn't even allowed to help training the new recruits. Well, finding out what had Senny's panties in a twist would kill time at least, so Garp marched over to his best friend's office. What's up, Senny? Tell me you didn't have anything to do with this shit, Garp, his friend growled at him. If this is about the West Wall, you've been saying for years that it needed to be replaced, so you can't get mad at me because it couldn't hold up to the cannonball. I didn't even throw it that hard. Sengoku pinched the bridge of his nose and took a deep breath. No, Garp. I mean this. He shoved a report in Garp's direction. Garp eyed the memo cautiously as he stepped forward. Papyrus the goat had taken refuge by the potted plant, well away from his favorite snack. That alone told the old marine whatever it was wasn't a mild annoyance. Sengoku's goat often ate whatever paperwork was upsetting the man. The fact it was hiding said this was serious. Laughing child monkey D. Luffy with Whitebeard crew. Did they have to go with that epitaph? He grumbled, pushing down the relief he felt at seeing the headline. If he stopped laughing every time he showed up, Sengoku snapped back. Do you have any idea the number of Marines that have reported for PTS care after running into Luffy? He's not that bad, Garp snorted, he's just a brat. Garp, he's not bad by your standards. And at the start of this shit show I'll grant I also underestimated how much trouble your grandson was going to be. But at this point it's only the elders' desire to have that fruit under their control that's keeping his bounty alive. As it is, this latest stunt has doubled it. So I'll ask you again, did you have anything to do with this? Garp mildly glared at his friend. How exactly would I have anything to do with this? I've been stuck here at Marineford for months. Can't even take a piss without someone knocking on the door, let alone call home. It bordered on accusing him of being a spy or a traitor. Not that anyone would say such to his face, of course. When they'd looked at him after Dragon had become a rebel, it had made sense. This time, though, well, Garp was no traitor, but Luffy also was no rebel or pirate. He was just a kid, and he was probably confused and a bit scared. Sengoku leaned in. I'm serious, Garp. I know you've been in contact with that redhead brat. Garp nodded at that. Understanding that Senny couldn't admit what was happening to Luffy was wrong. That Luffy needed at least one person out there looking for him that didn't think of him as a pawn to be used. Still, I haven't been able to reach him for weeks, he admitted. I think the line was compromised. So you don't know anything? Sengoku huffed a sigh as he sat down. I don't think I need to tell you how bad this is. They aren't going to want him in Whitebeard's power. Well, Luffy won't take orders from Newgate. I keep telling you Luffy does what he wants, damn the consequences. I'll pass that on, but that still doesn't answer why he's with them. Senny offered him some rice crackers as Papyrus tentatively approached the desk. Garp knew why. Ace was a Whitebeard now, and if Ace had found Luffy, he was one of the few people the brat would listen to. But telling his friend that would put both of his grandkids at risk. Regardless, it wouldn't take Senny very long to remember about Ace. When he did, Garp had no doubt that he would put together the pieces. It would be then up to him if he told the higher-ups. Garp was no fool. He knew that his job required him to share the information. It was for justice after all, but these were his grandkids. Ace might now be a pirate, but even Garp could admit the world wouldn't have given him much of a choice. And Luffy? He was still just some snot-nosed brat. He wasn't even old enough to be recruited, for crying out loud. And already the world government was after him. Not even for his father, but just because of some stupid fruit he had eaten. He understood that it was a very powerful, dangerous fruit, but this was his grandson. He joined the Marines to bring justice and peace, not for the world but for those he cared about. It burned that the Marines wanted his grandson to mete out a form of justice that Garp truly didn't feel the boy deserved. So he'd keep his mouth shut, and Sengoku could wrestle with if the higher-ups needed to know Luffy's relationship to the 2nd Division commander. Eventually the news would get out, of that Garp was sure. But he sure as hell wasn't going to be the one to let that information slip. Glancing at the memo again from the New World, he started to laugh. Looks like his idiot grandson started some major shit. Destroying a hidden marine base on one of Newgate's islands. Tapping the paragraph that covered the massive destruction his grandson caused, he grinned at Sengoku. Well, there you have it. Looks like Luffy just happened to be there. You really think that anyone is going to believe that? Senny, we both know Luffy has proved impossible to track. Which is more likely, he's somehow secretly managed to meet up with Whitebeard and Newgate kept it quiet, or that he happened to show up on Whitebeard's island and started shit. Sengoku let out a little huff of laughter. If it was anyone else but Luffy, I would say the first. But it is Luffy. It wouldn't be the first base he's appeared at and wrecked. So we'll assume he ended up on the island somehow, found the base and picked a fight. And the commotion alerted the Whitebeards. Garp nodded. Do we know for sure Luffy left with them? No, there were reports of a giant land kraken and our men lost sight of Luffy in the confusion. So he's in the wind again. Senny gave him a look and said he was well aware Garp was full of it, but couldn't prove it. It looks like it. I'll pass on the information. Right, Garp stood. I've got some cadets to train. I'll catch you later, Senny. Garp, if you find out anything, yeah, I'll let you know, he lied as he left. His friend didn't call him on it. Well, looks like your bounty went up, kiddo, Thatch said with a grin as he put another plate in front of Luffy. Truth be told, the jump in bounty had his guts twisting, and he wasn't the only one. The only saving grace right now, beyond the fact that Laughing Child was still wanted alive, that is, was the Marines didn't seem to think Luffy was with them. It was a small blessing, but he and the others would take it. Thatch knew deep down the moment that changed, those bastards would be gunning for the crew in a way they hadn't done for years. Not that it bothered the crew. Oyaji had claimed Luffy as his son, and as elder siblings they do their damned best to protect the little brat. Shihihi, we should go find Shanks and celebrate, right? You do realize he's a Yonko on another crew and technically a rival, right? Haruta asked. Luffy shrugged around the mouthful of meat. You can be friends and rivals. And he and Oyaji are friends. I can tell. They are, the other commander allowed. Haruta might have denied it a few months ago, or said they'd be grudging friends at best, but that would definitely be a lie now. Even if both Yonko crews were on much better terms thanks to the ball of sunshine that was Luffy didn't always mean they saw eye to eye though. They were friends, but they'd likely get into a fight if they met up too often. It upsets the other Yonko when we get together too often, starts fights. So, we just gotta beat them up. Thatch sighed. It would upset the balance and put the crew at risk for no real reason. So Oyaji doesn't like to do it. You can understand that at least, right? The teen pouted. Fine. I guess if Oyaji said so. I've been meaning to ask, why do you call Oyaji? Haruta asked, leaning forward. I do call him Oyaji, Luffy protested, but he feels so happy and warm thinking about everyone and it makes me want to laugh. So, Oyaji. So, not Gigi then. No, I got one of them, and he's mean sometimes and scary. I don't want another, Luffy said with a shudder. Thatch shared a look with Haruta. Yes, they both understood Garp was in a tough spot when it came to his grandkids. They could respect the fact he'd obviously gone out of his way to hide them. That didn't mean they had to approve of how he handled everything. The simple fact that all three boys were obviously traumatized by their interactions with the man angered Thatch. Worse still was how Ace and Sabo rationalized the abuse, pointing out all the situations Garp's training had gotten them out of. As if knowledge of high-ranking marine codes and fighting styles excused years of physical, emotional, and mental abuse. Thatch put that to the side as he put another plate in front of Luffy. Kid was just starting to hit the weight he probably was before this adventure according to Ace. Last one for lunch, kiddo. No fair. Yes, fair. That's your 10th plate, Haruta pointed out, besides Sabo's on his way back from his super-secret spy mission, right? You don't want to miss that. A cute pout. No, Koala called Ace this morning. Sabo's not coming back today. Oh? Thatch asked, already plotting a rescue mission if Dragon thought he could kidnap Sabo back. Their boss wasn't there, and Sabo got mad, so he broke some shit and got in trouble. Stuck cleaning up his mess, huh? Haruta laughed. I'm not surprised the Rev leader is avoiding him, though. Still, kinda sucks. Sabo's probably gonna be away for a while, huh? Yeah, Ace said at least a week. Hack is coming back though because they got the information Oyaji wanted. But not Sabo and Koala because she's got to keep yelling at Sabo. That tracked with what Thatch knew about the trio and he nodded. So just you and Ace for a while, huh? Think Ace'll forget the checkup? Luffy asked, looking off to the side. Luffy, buddy. You remember, so it doesn't matter if your brother does, you still got to go. I don't remember anything, Luffy denied, lying horribly. Will it help if I go with you? Haruta asked. When the team looked at the commander they shrugged. I know you're not a fan, and even if there probably not going to be any shots or anything, it can be uncomfortable to go, right? So I'll go with. You'll still need to answer their questions and shit, but I'll keep you company. How does that sound? The teen blinked before grinning widely and hugging Haruta. Thank you. No problem. Now, Sabo might not be coming back, but like you said, Hack is, so why don't you go and help keep a lookout for him? Alright. Luffy cheered before bolting out the door. They discovered Luffy might be shit at most chores, but for some reason he was a fantastic lookout even when he wasn't paying that much attention. I'll let Ace know you're going to go with Luffy tomorrow, Thatch promised, but in exchange you tell me exactly how it goes. Of course, the other commander agreed. Knowing Thatch meant how the nurses reacted to their youngest as well as any hints their body language gave to Luffy's overall condition. Luffy had gotten a physical when he first arrived. Marco had even been the one to do it. Marco was very used to dealing with D's and thus had been optimistic about Luffy's recovery after his time on the run. He was usually right, and he had been in matters of the cuts, scrapes, and bruises. He'd been off on the weight recovery, though. It was actually taking longer than expected. Enough so that Oyaji actually called Whitey Bay to get a second opinion. Marco had agreed easily enough, Hard not to when it was a bit like how Ace's original recovery with them went. Both devil fruits definitely messed with their metabolisms, but at least in Ace's case there had been some glaring dietary concerns that had come to light. The guy was fire. He needed more calories and more carbs in his diet than he'd been getting, preferring to eat meat and vegetables when reminded he couldn't live off of meat alone. Luffy's diet seemed to be a bit more rounded out, more because Luffy was always hungry and would eat anything. But that spoke of some other issues. Hopefully Whitey Bay could figure it out and they'd finally get the kid up to a good weight. Even if it had more to do with red eyes than his diet, Bay would be able to suggest something to prevent the frankly scary weight loss that happened. Luffy missed a meal at least. Whitey Bay offered a smile at Haruta as they lifted the boy onto the cot. Haruta wasn't much taller than Luffy, but the cots in medical were sized to work best for the majority of the crew. That meant people Juzo's height. "You ready for your checkup?" she asked, slipping on some gloves. Luffy pouted, "No, all right, that was fair." She smiled at the boy and picked up the chart Marco had prepared. It looked like they'd drawn and tested the blood a few days ago, so the results would be ready for her to review. That saved some hassle, at least. Looked like he was slightly anemic as expected, but the white blood count was within reason. "Okay then, looks like we don't need any more blood work. I'm just going to give you a really good exam and ask some questions. You have to answer honestly, though. All right?" "Fine." Haruta met her eyes and smiled, apparently unsurprised with how reluctant their youngest brother was. He and Ace had the same doctor as kids. "Ah. Remind me to schedule a visit to that island at some point. I think I need to have words with this so-called doctor," she hummed. Ace had come to them untrusting of medical professionals and downright suspicious of questions about his health. From what she could tell, even his chronic narcolepsy had been brushed off by the doctor as him acting out and attention-seeking. Ace's crew had managed to convince the teen it was a real thing, but not that it could be managed and treated. That had taken both her and Marco together. "He died," Luffy cut into her thoughts as he watched her check his reflexes. "Some guy stabbed him last year over a dice game." Dayton was pissed. Said it's hard to find even a quack on the take. ND Makino got sad cause none of the other doctors on the island see anyone but the nobles. Deep breaths, she reminded herself. Goa Kingdom was a shit stain on a map and would be dealt with later. Her job was to take care of her youngest brother. Yelling at Luffy about it wouldn't work. He might think she's yelling at him. He was a boy with a lot of raw power, yes. But he needed her help. She smiled at him and ignored how Haruta was giving her the side eye. "Okay Luffy, I want to listen to your heart and lungs next." "K." She took her time, first listening to his lungs. They sounded clear, no popping or crackling. The heart though. The beat was definitely off. There was an extra half beat and it sometimes started to skip and stutter. But as she listened it repeated. She leaned back and looked at Luffy, who refused to meet her eyes. "Luffy, do you have a heart murmur?" "What's that?" "An irregular heartbeat." "No, my heartbeat is always like this." "Luffy, you can't tell Ace and Sabo," the boy told her, glancing at her and then looking away. "They'd get all mad and yell, and it's fine. I'm fine." "Fine, huh?" She paused for a second and looked at the boy. He looked upset, but confident. "Your old doctor didn't know, did he?" Luffy pouted. "I can't get it to not anymore. So the murmur has gotten worse. But if he could have gotten it to sound normal even for a moment, it is part of your fruit abilities, huh?" Luffy nodded. "Okay. Let Marco or one of the nurses know if the beat changes or if it starts to hurt you. If you promise that, I won't tell Ace and Sabo," she said, looking at Haruta. She knew Haruta was definitely going to tell the brothers, Marco and Whitebeard, as well as anyone else tasked with keeping the kid alive and healthy. But if it was part of his fruit, it wasn't something to be worried about. Just something to keep an eye on. Besides, it was likely Ace and Sabo knew, but didn't know it was abnormal. The exam continued much the same. Beyond the odd heartbeat, Luffy was what she'd expect for a D. His hearing was particularly good, as was his eyesight. His hair was brittle though, as were his fingernails. Combined with the blood test results, he was definitely suffering from malnutrition. "Okay Luffy. Now for the fun part. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and I need you to answer without lying. Even if you think I won't like the answer." "Are you gonna yell at me?" "I might yell," she admitted, already having a rough idea of what some of the answers would be, "but not at you. More at the world." Shehehehe, okay. Sabo does that a lot, too. Well, he's a revolutionary. Kinda his job, she joked. Now let's begin. Do you ever feel sleepy for no reason? Yep. Have trouble sleeping? Uh-huh. Ever feel weak for no reason? Yeah, but then if I eat something it's all better. She noted that down. She knew about the fact he was always hungry, the weight loss. Sensitivity to heat and cold could be related to his fruit, so that was a bit pointless. Irritably? Sometimes. But it's better now. I used to be angry all the time. And angry because I was angry. Which sucked. I bet it did, she said with a smile, now pretty sure she knew what was going on. Last question. And it's a big one, okay. He nodded, leaning forward. How's your poop? The teen blinked before breaking out into a wide grin and laughing. Shehehehe, no one ever asks me. Shehehe. I always ask them, but no one ever asked me before. She let him laugh, grinning along with Haruta. Whitey wasn't surprised that Luffy asked people. When children noticed they did things a bit differently, sometimes they started asking questions. And if they didn't know why they were asking, it resulted in pretty vague questions at that. While he was still giggling, she spoke. I poop about once a day, myself. Every other for me, Haruta added, obviously unsure but willing to play along. Shehehe. I poop way more than that. Like, a bunch a day. More than 2? He nodded, 1 for each meal. Any pain or discomfort? No, but it's not all wet. I know to tell someone about that. Luffy told her seriously. Whitey wasn't surprised by that. She bet growing up people had worried about his size, appetite, and ability to gain weight. Diarrhea was commonly a symptom to the more troubling causes. But still, his doctor should have picked up on this. Alright. So, that's it for your exam. It's gonna take me a bit to mix up your medication, though. So I'll see you in 2 days. Yay. Bye. Luffy cheered before running out of the room. Haruta just looked at her. You're not telling him what it is. He'd probably get it wrong when he tells anyone else, and they'd be breathing down my neck convinced he's about to die instead of letting me make the medicine. I hate it that you're right, they admitted, but there is something, and we can fix it? Get a handle on it, yes. Tell Thatch and Marco I want them both here in 2 days. Oyaji is gonna wanna come, and Sabo probably won't be back by then. That's not my problem. I'm not delaying the start of treatment. Now, I have some pills to make, so unless you want a checkup, too. I'm going. Jesh. Thanks, Bae. Anytime, Haruta, and he'll be fine. I promise it's nothing we can't handle. How's Ace, my son? Marco shook his head, driving me nuts. Yoi. I keep telling him Whitey Bae isn't going to just tell me what she suspects before she's got confirmation. But you know how he is. Gahahaha, he is quite protective, his father laughed. He could only smirk at that. It was one of the reasons Ace had been made a division commander after being with the crew for such a short time. Ace could often be a hothead and was more than a bit of a bastard at times, but when he cared for someone he cared for them with the fierceness of a blazing inferno. Marco wouldn't be surprised if that personality wasn't exactly why the Maramara no Mi was awake as it was. True, Ace had used Conquerors once or twice before while running around as a rookie captain. And apparently as a freaking kid, which Marco had confirmed. Sometimes he was amazed Goa was still standing after those 3, but that was usually when he remembered that Sabo had been forcefully removed right when he and Ace started to get old enough to use their crazy strength and abilities more effectively. That, when combined with how much Ace cared about his weirdly dysfunctional yet somehow functioning, bandit, family explained why the island was still there. There were bets for how long it would take the 3 brothers to realize Dayton was a hell of a lot more than a simple bandit. It was amazing how willfully blind both Ace and Sabo were to the fact that the woman that they claimed as their foster mom had ties to some of the big names. Enough that it explained her going to ground in the East Blue and still having an active bounty. Marco was pretty sure Luffy was aware of it, oddly enough. Him, or Red Eyes. Either way he didn't think that invalidated the bet he placed. Luffy wouldn't tell anyone because he didn't care. How about you, my son? Do you have any idea of what Whitey Bae has discovered? I have a few suspicions, Yoi, he admitted easily. There was a reason he had the blood tests run and results ready before Whitey came. Still, but I'm not afraid to admit that she's the better doctor. Best to wait for her to tell you, Oyaji. Whitebeard pouted at that but quickly smiled as the door opened and Luffy ran in and threw himself onto Oyaji's lap with a wide grin and an infectious giggle. "Hello son, keeping Ace on his toes I see?" "Sheehehehe. Yep. We called Sabo and he was all angry and yelling, and then Ace was yelling and then Thatch came and gave me a snack and we made faces at Ace. Oh, and Sabo says hi. I take it he couldn't make it in time, Whitebeard asked Ace and Thatch as they entered the room, pointer finger rubbing gently on Luffy's head. It was cute to see Luffy leaning into it. World's strongest man was a sucker for a cute kid at the end of the day. Hey, if he didn't throw a temper tantrum over Dragon not being there, he would have been home by now, Ace said with a shrug. Thatch lightly smacked him, like you weren't pissy he didn't get to deck the guy, either. Plus, I didn't think you have any grounds to talk about property damage. Ace laughed, and some of the tension he'd been carrying left his shoulders. Couldn't be easy for Ace. Luffy was well loved and Ace had been a ball of nerves when Haruta had confirmed that there was something going on medically with Luffy. Of course, the idiot had immediately assumed the worst and Marco was pretty sure he was willing to fight God to keep Luffy well and happy. Only the assurance from Whitey that it was something that could be managed had kept him calm. Well, calm-ish. "Oh good, you're all here," Whitey said, walking into the room carrying a bag. She placed it down and started handing out packets of paper. Marco started flipping through his immediately. "What's with the homework?" Thatch asked. "I know you, Thatch. You might act like an airhead but you're going to go digging till you know every little detail. So I thought I'd give you a starting point." "Same for Ace," Whitey said with a grin. "You might not give a crap about your medical issues but it is your kid brother." "Fair," Thatch replied with a grin. "Alright, so let's get to it." Whitey reached into her bag. "Wait," Luffy said, raising his hand with a wide grin before his eyes rolled back and he went limp. Marco couldn't stop the instinctive lurch forward. He didn't think any of them could. His heart was still pounding as Luffy's body sat back up. Red eyes blinked open as the being grinned widely at them. "Sheehehe, okay now we're ready." "Seriously? Are you trying to give me a heart attack?" Ace snapped. The fruit shrugged, the smile fading slightly. "Luffy won't understand." The fruit probably wouldn't either, but it was endearing to see it cared. If not vaguely terrifying. Marco knew Phoenix cared deeply for him. The Phoenix not only healed him often before he even called on that power, but also allowed him to heal others. He understood that, he appreciated how much the Gum cared because of that. But the fact remained that devil fruits were not supposed to be able to take over the body of their host if the host had a soul. If there was no soul it was very hard for a thing to eat a fruit. When it did happen, the fruit was forced awake and in control of the body. It made them dangerous and unpredictable at times, though they could live and grow. They could also die, and so far any fruit eaten by a non-living thing didn't come back from that. It was why beings like Macy were so rare. What the Gum was doing right now, though, that was on a different level. Luffy was so young, he didn't understand the risks. Marco was sure very few of the crew understood the danger. The Marines definitely didn't. Maybe Oyaji did, given the tightness around his eyes. Whitey rolled her eyes. "Fine. Pay attention then." Yeah, Thatch replied, frowning slightly. "What's wrong with the kiddo?" In a word, hyperthyroidism. She pulled out a bottle and tossed it to Ace. "It should probably be able to manage it with medication, at least." "Hyperwhatism?" the fruit asked. "Is this because Luffy is so Luffy?" "No," Whitey replied, "and I don't think it was caused by you, either. In fact, I'm pretty sure you're why we won't need to do surgery." "Surgery? My son," she said, "we won't be doing that." "But, Ace, I won't lie," Whitey said as she crossed her arms. "It's still a possibility we might need to at some point. But, judging by the test results and what information I got from your home island, Luffy's devil fruit kept him alive." "What does this have to do with the heart thing?" the fruit asked, frowning. "Ace," Thatch slapped his hand over the teen's mouth, "no more yelling." "I'm assuming you changed his heartbeat then," Marco challenged. He got a shrug in reply. Luffy's heart was all bam. It was hurting him. "My beat doesn't hurt him, but it's exhausting to do all the time." So, another shrug. "Any other changes we should know about?" I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you made it easier for Luffy to absorb food, and thus nutrients he needs. Judging by these blood tests, there is no way he was getting enough before eating you." Oh yeah. Sheehehe. Keep doing that. Whitey turned to the others. I'm sure there's other things going on, too. Probably a lot more than we'd be comfortable knowing, to be honest. But the long and short of it is there's no way to take a devil fruit from someone without killing them, and in this case having the gum being so active kept Luffy alive. And hopefully not needing surgery. Marco sighed before nodding. Hyperthyroidism can in extreme cases lead to coma and death, Ace. I'd suspected given some of the results from the blood panels that something was causing Luffy's inability to gain weight and the nutrition he needed. Given that it wasn't glaringly obvious to me, I think it's safe to assume that Whitey is right, Yoi. But yes. I reached out to your home island to confirm, spoke with Amakino. Some of the things she told me about Luffy before he ate his fruit were concerning to say the least. Frankly, given the shit medical care you got as a kid, Ace, Luffy probably would have slipped into a coma and died before he reached his teen years. But now that we know what's up, we can manage it. So what are we looking at, daughter? Medication twice a day and some diet changes. Might need to supplement with vitamins, but I leave that up to Marco's discretion. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's probably going to take a month or two until everything settles. And if that doesn't work, well, we can always try surgery. I'd like to avoid it, it would put them at risk down the lines to complications. But this is definitely manageable, Oyaji. Kid is gonna be fine. Should I not be awake? The fruit asked, frowning. Am I making it worse? Idiot, she just told you you're the reason he's still alive, right, Marco? Ace replied. Marco thought about it. Whitey hadn't expressly said that the fruit needed to be awake to keep Luffy alive. But he didn't think Ace's conclusion was wrong. Oyaji wouldn't tell him much about his conversation with Shanks and the fruit, but he knew that the fruit was awakened almost instantly. Marco was well aware that the fruit admitted to having saved Luffy's life that very day. Maybe it had sensed the unbalance in the host body. That could have awoken the fruit, especially if they were compatible on a base level. A fruit that was fond of its host was a powerful ally. I wouldn't go about being in charge all the time, Yoi. But I think you going back to sleep would be undesirable. Besides, I think Luffy would drag you back if you pulled away. He talks about you a lot, Yoi. The fruit lit up at that, their smile becoming less manic and more warm as they hugged themselves. Luffy is truly the best human, they said before yawning. We're going to nap. Luffy doesn't understand any of this, so I'm trusting you to understand it for him. Marco's lip twitched at that. It was such an Ace thing to say about the kid. He supposed it just proved how deeply the fruit cared. Probably pushed itself to the front and took over because Luffy wouldn't understand. He doubted the fruit did, really either. But this way they got to ask questions and protect Luffy from feeling helpless. He might not trust the fruit. It was dangerous and obviously not a weak paramecia. But he respected it to protect Luffy. We got this, Yoi.